At the time, we had this governor in Illinois named Rod Blagojevich. He was basically running Chicago in a very old school pay-for-play way. The state legislature puts a law in place saying pay-for-play is over, and this drives Rod Blagojevich crazy. What was happening at that window of time was Barack Obama was being elected president of the United States. And so what happens is the governor gets to appoint someone to take that place. So we flip on the wire thinking we're going to hear all these contractors getting shaken down for bribes. What we really hear is Governor Blagojevich wrestling with himself about how he's going to monetize Barack Obama's Senate seat to his own benefit. Basically, he was trying to sell the position of senator to the highest bidder.
I was like, this is gonna be a stupid question. What happens if you have to use the gun in an airplane? I'm like, because I never really thought of it.
Yeah.
And he was like, no one's ever asked me that. It's a good question. And he's like, well, and he explained it, like how the hollow points allow it so it doesn't actually break through the plane's shell. And it makes sense. But for most people, you're like thinking about the guns and you're like, I mean, if that just goes through, it's like pressure.
Yeah, and people, I was told otherwise. I'm not. This is my area of expertise, but I was
said that too.
I was told if you shoot a hole in the plane, it's not like everyone gets sucked out or anything like that. It's a bad situation, but it's not like instant death or anything like that. And and so I think. Well, we just had the door that got ripped off of that Alaska Airlines flight.
I know, I was gonna make that joke, but we weren't friends enough yet that I was like, I don't know if I can make this joke when you're flying out. Yeah. But yeah, it's happening like all over, like because
I guess that one Boeing plane's just bad news, huh?
Yeah, well, they discontinued them because I guess it's the welding they did, which is like I hear from a lot of like engineering friends and stuff that always say this. They're like, you'll be surprised how poorly engineered a lot of stuff is that you rely on.
I know,
and it's like RVs. They always highlight. They're like, you get in a crash with an RV. They're like, you don't even want to know how bad that goes quick because they're just not.
Well, yeah, you can tell that's not a super sturdy thing. Right?
True. Yeah. But you think planes? I actually have that thought.
I think the whole challenge of the plane is making it sturdy while keeping it light.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Sometimes I sit there. I'm a big guy, and I'm sitting like on the window seat or something, and I'm like, I feel like I could just punch right through this like window.
There's
right
nothing
here.
to it.
Yeah, it feels like soft plastic, and I'm like, we're about to be 40,000 feet in the air in this thing, and it's just like, it's crazy. But I mean, yeah, there's reasoning behind all of it, but it is funny just seeing that. And then, I was gonna make that joke, but then I was like, I'll wait until we have the conversation. And then, I mean, Tom and friends, we can start getting into that. But so you just highlighted, so you have a shift in career. 9/11 happens. You've been doing these, bank scandals that have been happening all around Chicago, and suddenly you're flipped into kind of this counterterrorism role. What was the career shift that happened there? What was the feeling, I guess, going into this new avenue or kind of new lane?
Well, I needed to understand the war on terror, right? I was not a guy who was very well versed in kind of the original Afghan-Soviet war from which Al-Qaeda arose and kind of how bin Laden fit into that. And so, you sort of get a crash course on all that, and no one's sending you to the academy to teach you that, but you're talking to people, you're piecing together public source information, you're reading Time and Newsweek magazine to try to understand how we got here and where did this problem come from? What's their grievance? Do they hate us for our freedom, or are there other issues? And so, but at the end of the day, I looked at my case because as a fraud case. And I stuck with what I already knew, right? There were good Muslims who were not donating money for jihad. They were donating money because of what their version of tithing is. It's called zakat, and they give 10% or some percent of their income for the poor and needy. And so, but the difference between Catholics and the Muslims is that the Muslims actually do it. And
that's a good point.
Yeah. And so and Muslims are kicking in a bunch of money to these charities with the understanding that it's going to help out widows and orphans and stuff like that. But the money is being diverted to Muslim fighting groups, Chechnya, Al-Qaeda, Bosnia, these places. And they didn't sign up for that. And so I began looking at this thing from a different angle as a fraud investigation, as opposed to a counterterrorism intelligence case.
Can I interrupt you real quick with just how you may be getting into this, so I apologize if kind of bringing the story early, but how were these set up originally? Like, were these game planned by these groups in the Middle East and like setting up fake groups here? Or was it like it just so happened that they had some connections back home, and they just said, you know what, we want to throw the money to them.
The leader of one of these charities was Mujahideen in the Afghan-Soviet War, and he was present with bin Laden during the formation of Al-Qaeda. No. And so like literally we do a search of one of their offices and we find like pictures of this guy and bin Laden together. And we find the actual founding documents of Al-Qaeda in our case, which are now kind of, part of, American counterterrorism lore. But it all came from this case. And so, and there were some sheiks in Saudi Arabia who were kind of underwriting the whole effort. It was a vast conspiracy going on. But in my mind, it was a conspiracy to defraud the Muslims in America who were being defrauded, right? They were being ripped off because their money was being diverted to stuff that they didn't intend. And no one understood this. This was the case that I was making, but we got raked over the coals in the media and the Muslim community in Chicago for basically going after a charity. Mm-hmm. And right, because what could be nicer than a charity with pictures of these poor Muslim widows and orphans? But our point was that we're not going after the Muslims. We're not saying that the Muslims of Chicago who are donating to these charities were bad. We're saying that they're victims.
Yeah, and at that time, there's a lot of Islamophobia too.
There's a lot. I mean, the Muslims were on their heels, right? Yeah. They were being blamed for everything.
Yeah.
And so I get why they had their back up and they were very defensive about the case that I was working as part of this team. But I hope history vindicated us because we ended up closing down these charities, deporting some of the leaders, putting others in prison, and we basically cut off the flow of money from these charities to Al-Qaeda. And I think that was a good thing. I'm proud of our accomplishments in that case.
Were you guys able to cross-check like how much money actually ended up going to them?
The case was not the evidence we had was not a linear storyline. It was really a mosaic because by the nature of money going into a war zone, which produces widows and orphans, and finding out where it goes, that money's fungible, and it's hard to follow the cash. It's not like a investment fraud case domestically where I can follow the money from the investor to the cocaine that the bad guy bought with it or the gambling. And so we never really got the entire story down about how much was going. We got bits and pieces of them buying a package of a giant shipment of hand warmers for the trigger pullers in Chechnya who were at war with the Russians in their own jihad and stuff. So it was a lot of evidence like that. They're buying equipment for for Muslim fighting groups elsewhere, but that was not what the donors intended. That's not what the donors signed up for. And so. Yeah.
Was this national or was it focused mainly Chicago?
The charities were Chicago.
Yeah.
They just happened to be Chicago based. They were accepting donations nationally, and most of their the work that they were doing was overseas. I mean, these charities were not directly supporting the 9/11 attacks. The 9/11 attacks weren't an expensive operation, right? It was a bunch of guys who went to flight school and then with box cutters.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, then that ends, and I find myself kind of trying to figure out what do I want to do with my career.
So before going to that,
yeah,
did the situation 9/11, and then of course, like you break down a charity that's in your own city, did that change your perspective at all about, I guess the country, the city that was, you kind of grew up knowing like that surrounded you? Did you look at people different after that? Or
no, I wouldn't say that. No, I mean, I looked one thing they taught me was I was always one agent working dozens and dozens of cases on the fraud squad. And there were other agents each who had their own caseload. And the culture of the FBI was such that I could grab a friend and he would go out and do an interview with me, or I'd grab 5 guys to do a surveillance or 4 other agents to do an arrest. And it was very collaborative in that respect, but we weren't really working as teams. I had to manage my own cases. And so I went from that to having one case and then, a half a dozen agents working that case together as a team. So it really taught me collaboration in a way that I had never learned before during my fraud days.
What is going on, everybody? Quick pause in the action. Just want to say that if you're enjoying the content thus far, you can do me a huge favor and leave this video a like and subscribe so you don't miss any future content. And if you're on Spotify or Apple Music, leave the podcast a 5-star review and make sure to follow so you don't miss any future episodes. As a reminder, this is the second part with Tom, so make sure to check out part 1 as well. And with that, let's get back to the episode. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's like, again, it's those moments, those hardship where like people look at it. So it's so easy to be like, man, that sucks. But there's always positive aspects that come out of it and kind of growth that, if you don't lean on, those situations can really, kick you while you're down. But if you lean on, like they can years later, you can still be looking back on it and say like, that was a good period in my life where I was able to, kind of push forward.
Yeah.
So you speak about the next step in the career. What's going through your mind at that point, figuring out
where am I going to land?
Yeah.
And so my days with counterterrorism were coming to a close. I didn't really want to be a counterterrorism agent.
I was going to ask that. It was there like a feeling of,
well, what I didn't like about the counterterrorism work is I have such respect for the agents who do it, but it's really playing defense, right? Yeah. There's not that many terrorist acts here in the U.S. for us to investigate and play whodunit. And so then what you're really doing is investigating people who may have like evil in their hearts and like jihad on their minds, but they haven't done anything illegal yet. And then we're going to try and disrupt them before they do the next terrorist act. It's really hard, Reed. I mean, it's really hard. And the means by which we celebrated our victories were always confusing to me. I drive home and look up and see the Sears Tower. I'm like, well, it's standing. I guess I've done a good job today.
Yeah.
And so as opposed to a fraud case, which you have a guy in an orange jumpsuit at the end of it, right? And so while I had all the respect in the world for the counterterrorism agents who got good at it and fell in love with that type of work, it wasn't for me. I was a criminal agent and I wanted to do criminal cases with a beginning, middle, and end. And I wanted them to be historical crimes that had already happened or were happening right now, that I could build a case.
So let me ask you about, the idea where you identify that a potential terrorist or whatever it might be. There's been a lot of controversy around, I can't think of the word, but essentially setting them up. So they say that there's agents that might get involved with these groups and say like, hey, we should do this. And then people, push to it and then they arrest them. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, let's talk about that because I think a lot of people misunderstand that. We had a situation like that in Chicago. There's no version of this where we are like picking random mentally ill people and saying, okay, we're going to plant the idea of them. Before we can even open up a full investigation, there must be a credible threat that this person is planning to commit a terrorist act, right? And then at that point, the FBI creates this Truman Show around them with informants and undercovers to try to inject themselves into it. Let me give you an example from my life. And again, I want to make it clear, I was not the case agent on this, but I was on the team doing the surveillance. We had a guy in Jacksonville, Florida, where I live, who had been diagnosed with like kidney failure. And he didn't want to go on dialysis. His kidneys were failing because in his mind, he did not want to go on dialysis. And so what he said, he told some friends that you know what, if it turns out that my kidney has failed such that I'm going to go on dialysis, I'm going to go to the mosque and I'm going to just start shooting Muslims. And I'm going to allow myself to be killed during the course of that, but I'm going to take out as many Muslims as possible. That's what this guy said. Yeah. And so we get word from he was an idiot. He was telling this to anyone who would listen. Word gets back to the FBI, and better and smarter agents than me are assigned the case. And I'm assigned on the surveillance team to basically follow this guy around. And so my question to you as the skeptical taxpayer is, what should we do at that point? Do we follow him around and wait for him to show up at the mosque one day with a gun? Or do we begin to take control of the situation? And what we did was we introduced informants and undercovers into his life, along with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, to get to know him, show some compassion for his idea of killing Muslims. And we offered to sell him an illegal gun with a silencer to make it happen. Because he'd expressed a interest in having a gun with a silencer. He didn't know where to score a silencer. It just so happened that our undercover had a spare silencer to sell him. And so I think
how about that?
And so we sold him the silencer and took the case down before he could kill a bunch of Muslims. Did we do the wrong thing? Did we lead him by the nose into that crime? No. We took control of the situation by surrounding him with undercovers and informants to get him, to neutralize him and get him off the streets before he could commit this horrible mass killing. And the FBI has used that model again and again and again with people who have shown an interest of doing that, to blowing up the federal building in Chicago. Worked a case like that. We introduce a bunch of informants and kind of lead the guy down the road until we sell him the explosive device he's going to use for that. All of this being his idea, but we are creating the atmosphere for him to actually commit a crime that we can arrest him for to prevent a mass killing. You can criticize it all you want, but it's probably saved thousands of lives.
No, I fully agree with that. It's just you see it all the time.
No, I
like
get
people,
criticized by that all the time. I look
yeah.
at the comment section of my Instagram. There's always somebody talking about how we found some mentally ill guy and kind of carried him through this whole plan. Bottom line is, this guy was on this road to doing these plans, and then we inject ourselves into it as people who are going to help facilitate his wishes in order to lure him into the crime to stop him from a mass killing.
So let me understand this better. Why do you think people have that like preconceived notion of entrapment being the aspect that it is, or whatever it might be?
Because the internet's full of dummies who like conspiracy theories and have a bug up their ass about the FBI. It's fine. My job's not to win their hearts and minds. It's to explain how it actually works, and they can choose to accept that or not. I don't get bent out of shape about people who hate the FBI.
So I was going to actually dive into this a little bit later, but it's a good kind of segue here now. What is your view? There's some politicians now that are popular that say that they would dismantle the FBI, dismantle the CIA. You have calls from people in Congress, you have popular politicians, you have popular media people. There's people that want to talk. What is your view on that? Why do you think that they kind of take that route? And then I guess, could you steelman what they see and the reasonings they may have, and then showcase why it's not really a good idea?
I believe that the politicians who are calling for the disbanding of the FBI are incredibly cynical and don't actually believe that, but they believe it's popular with a certain segment of their base, the low information kind of heavily online voters, and in calling for the disbandment of the FBI and brings in donations to them, it brings in votes to them, and it's just kind of popular with that sort of red meat right wing base. And so I understand that, but I also know that when stuff hits the fan, when they start receiving threats, they're not calling 911, they're calling the FBI. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Vivek Ramaswamy, all of those guys within the past 6 months have had really, really bad people begin targeting them for assassination. And when they needed help, they called in the FBI. And so in the FBI, you know what they did? They stepped up and they did the right thing, and they put the bad guys in prison on behalf of these politicians who want us out of jobs.
Does it anger you to see that there's this like movement towards it?
I've never had a whole lot of respect for politicians to begin with.
I don't blame you. But.
And so my feelings aren't really hurt when people who I don't respect say dumb things. And so I get it. I understand that people out there may really love a certain politician and may be upset that politician, gets indicted, and that's just the nature of politics. But I promise you that, as an FBI agent for 26 years, I'm totally non-political. I don't vote. I set up my life in such a way that I don't care. It doesn't matter to me who the president is. I have no politics. And I think in nearly every agent I worked with, I couldn't tell you if you put a gun to my head who they voted for. I've never heard an FBI agent express a political opinion on the job. It's never happened.
So let me add, there was that case, and again, like I want to say it just outward, like I fully am on your side with this.
I'm happy to have this conversation. Yeah. I don't mind this at all.
It's more so it's really interesting because I think there is so much misinformation about it, and you say like that people love to capitalize on it. What happened with the Hunter Biden laptop, where you had a number of, I believe through the CIA, it was like 50 something agents that came out basically saying,
let's be clear about that. Okay. Right. So no, I know you can finish your questions. Give your audience some context.
It's just, it's the main idea is that some people have argued that there has been some like politicalization around it. And I guess, what's your view on that?
Right. So what happens is the Hunter laptop story comes out as promulgated by Rudy Giuliani, who had some credibility issues by that point in his career.
For sure.
And to put it nicely. And so there's this laptop. And so not a single person from the FBI or the CIA weighed in on that. What happened was a bunch of former FBI agents and CIA agents and intelligence professionals all kind of co-signed a letter prior to the election saying that this appears to be, based on their experience, appears to be a Russian misinformation campaign. They were wrong. Those agents got it. Those former agents got it wrong. Not a single one of those people was on the payroll of the FBI or the CIA at the time. They were presenting their own political opinions based on what they thought they knew. Right? The FBI didn't weigh in on that. The CIA didn't weigh in on that. The FBI doesn't want to touch anything prior to an election. And then the election happens, and so people, and that story gets quashed by Twitter and by other places. Weren't even allowing the New York Post story to come out. And that was wrong also, right? We need to have a free press. We need to examine these things. The New York Post happened to be right. Rudy Giuliani, even a stop clock is right twice a day. He had a story there that he gave to the New York Post, and he got it right, that there was this laptop that had all this derogatory information about Hunter Biden. I'm still not entirely clear what was on that, but it was a story that deserved to be vetted out.
It's overkill, but it is something.
Do I believe for a second that story would have swung the election from Biden to Trump? I don't, but I have no idea what goes on in the hearts and minds of voters.
Yeah.
I can't imagine there being some like super excited Trump voter who then decided they were going to vote for Biden because these former CIA and FBI guys said this laptop story was BS. It doesn't strike me as honest, but I might be wrong. I don't know. I mean, the whole thing was handled very poorly by everybody every step of the way, but it wasn't the FBI and the CIA. It was a bunch of former agents.
So I guess that kind of continues the question is, do you think that how do you feel about that? Obviously, everyone has the freedom of speech to express their opinion, to come forward, no matter what career you're in. But do you think that there's a level of responsibility that comes with the badge where even once you're out, you still have to kind of...
Absolutely. That's why you will never, ever hear me express a political opinion.
Yeah.
Ever. And, I'll call out politicians when they do something illegal.
Yeah.
Because that's a case. And then I talk about cases and we can, my social media platforms. But yeah, the idea that anyone's going to take my political opinions more seriously than yours or someone off the streets or someone stranger on Twitter is crazy. I don't have any more political insights into the way America should run, what public policies should or shouldn't happen, other than, my tiny little area of expertise in the world of financial crimes. So, but I do think people might tend to overweight my opinion, and they shouldn't. My opinion's no more valid than anyone else's when it comes to politics. And everyone's very, very lucky that I have no opinions when it comes to politics. I find all politics just to be a disgusting hobby.
Trust me, I couldn't agree more. I studied it, and I think it's like it's the most ridiculous thing.
Sorry, I'm denigrating your major.
No. Keep killing it, because I'll tell you what, it's when you study it and then it's like you watch it and you're like, no, like none of this is like the bill for the border just comes out, and I was just reading through it, and it's like, we're sending $250 to $250 million to Ukraine, 14 billion to Israel. And it's like, and again, I don't even like really diving into it too deep for US. I'm more focused on geopolitical kind of happenings. But in general, it's just like, man, it's just so foggy, and it's just. But I wanted to bring that up.
I'm happy to address it. My point, though, is that I don't have a political agenda there. And but I can take a look at the situation, like the Hunter Biden laptop thing, and see every misstep, every step of the way that the media companies did, the former agents did. I don't think former FBI and CIA agents should be weighing in on politics at all, honestly. I just find it there's the Hatch Act, which prevents us from getting political while we're in office. I think those people who feel very unshackled to run their mouth afterwards, I just find the whole thing distasteful. I think it's distasteful behavior for a former FBI agent to get involved with politics.
So I guess, what do you think would be some steps that could be taken right now to kind of fix that relationship that's happening with the people? The fact that there's a conglomerate of individuals that are like, it's all a conspiracy.
Right. Okay. I think what the FBI needs to do is highlight the good cases they do, right? There's probably the Trump investigations that everyone's got their panties in a wad. There's probably a dozen agents working those investigations, right? We got 12,000 agents nationwide doing cases. I think everyone can agree are good things to do, right? And so every day in my social media, I tell the story of a case that I worked or a case that other FBI agents worked that I think everyone would agree were good and righteous cases. And it's fun to go back and forth with my viewers to talk about, whether this turned out well, or why didn't they do this, or why didn't they do this, or was this sentence appropriate? But I think the FBI needs to do a better job of trumpeting their day-to-day work and show that FBI agents are out there busting their asses and putting their lives on the line every day for you, the taxpayer, whether you like us or don't like us, on cases that have nothing to do with politics.
Do you think it'd be good for an opportunity for like an educational outlet as well, where, the Patriot Act, you highlighted that. And I know I saw you in another podcast and they were talking about it, and they're saying that, it's this big, people love to highlight that as a conspiracy, and you're like, no, it got rid of a lot of deficiencies. There's always going to be give, and there's always going to be take. It's what it is. But it was a very important piece that people just don't understand because they don't read it. They don't look at it. Do you think that there could be some like educational outreach?
I was a media
similar?
spokesperson for the FBI for probably 20 years of my 26 years. And we're bound by the Department of Justice rules about what we're allowed to talk about and not allowed to talk about. And so it was always frustrating to me how hamstrung I was as far as kind of educating the public about the good work the FBI is doing. And so I'm kind of having fun with my own social media presence right now because I'm doing the job that I really wanted to be doing when I was working for the FBI, as far as advocating for the cases out there that are making a difference on a day-to-day basis.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I can agree more. That's what I love about your social media, because it's like in the day and age of like these shorts getting so goofy, where, you know, it's like, I don't know, the craziest editing or this or that. You keep it simple. You tell the story. People can connect to it quickly. They actually get the resolution. They can understand what you're actually doing. And, you know, again, I agree. I think it's like so important for breaking down, because I see these people and it's just like, you can always look and be like, maybe there's some, you know, room that we need to fix, or maybe some adjustments get made. And that's fine. That's what conversation's for.
Yeah.
But when you're just like, oh, they're evil, it's like, why are they evil? Do you have any reasoning? And they're like, oh, well, this thing. And you're like, that's a huge thing that's super generalized. Like, you're not even going into it.
Well, you know how it is with commenters on the internet, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a silent majority of people who are interested in kind of learning and kind of understanding how the world works. And then there's the commenters who I think are just having fun trolling, and so they can enjoy themselves.
My way to go into it now is because I get some crazy comments and I'm just like, I think about it. I'm like, probably 90% of these are not real, like with the bots and stuff.
Right. Well, I mean, you sometimes you click on the people behind the most insidious things, and there's 0 followers, zero, like,
no profile
like, like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Is this some Russian troll farm, or is this, or what's going on here? Is this some 15-year-old kid in his underpants in his mom's basement? So it's water off a duck's back. I don't let it bother me.
So let's continue. We're back in Chicago. Just finished up with counterterrorism. You're having that debate, and you want to stick with, you know, kind of what you were doing previously, which is kind of the financial crimes, looking at that.
Yeah, but then an opportunity pops up, right?
And I was about to say, we're talking about politicians.
Yeah. And so at the time, we had this governor in Illinois named Rod Blagojevich, and he was crooked as a barrel of snakes.
He has a name for it too, I'll tell you what.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to mess with his ethnicity. I'm sure there's
Oh no, I don't mean it like that. I just mean like, I don't know why. It's just it's a name that pops where you can just
it was tough for the headline writers of the Chicago Tribune, because you're kind of running out of real estate there, so everyone just called him Blago.
Yeah.
And so Blago was running the state government. One, he was doing it from Chicago as opposed to Springfield, and which probably was his ultimate undoing, right? So he didn't want to live in Springfield. He thought Springfield was this dead from the dick uptown, which it kind of is. And so he didn't want to go to the state capitol. He wanted to run the state government from his little house in Chicago.
Yeah, that's already a problem.
Yeah, well, what happens is, though, you get the kind of muscle of like a very big, well-funded U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutor, and FBI in Chicago, as opposed to a much smaller town prosecutor and FBI in Springfield. And so, and he was basically running Chicago in a very old school pay-for-play way. And the idea being that if you made political donations to him and his party and his people, then you would get contracts and you would get jobs. Very simple. And so then the state legislature puts a law into place saying pay for play is over. If you make a political contribution starting January 1st, 2009, if you make a political contribution, then you can no longer have a government contract, maybe even a government job. I don't remember what the law was. And this drives Rod Blagojevich crazy. He's like, oh my God, we got a problem here. So fall of 2008, he sets up a war room to begin contacting all the contractors who have these government contracts, asking them for donations, because on January 1st, he can no longer ask them for donations. So he wanted to get big paydays from them, right? And so this is all very interesting to us. So we apply for, and again, I wasn't the case agent on this either, but I was a guy who got put onto the wiretap. We apply for the permission from the courts to tap his phones and bug his workroom. And we thought we were going to be listening to this interesting pay for play thing where he's shaking down government contractors in exchange for contributions that would allow them to get contracts into the future for the rest of his administration. What was happening at that window of time in November 2008 was Barack Obama was being elected president of the United States. Barack Obama was a senator from the state of Illinois. And while we didn't fully understand the implications of that at the time as far as this wire, when your senator in Illinois becomes president, it leaves an empty Senate seat. The people of Illinois are now only represented by one senator, not two. And that's a problem, right? And so what happens is the governor gets to appoint someone to take that place, basically to appoint someone to serve out the balance of Barack Obama's Senate term while Barack Obama is busy being president of the United States.
Did you know how long he had left on that term?
Either 2 or 4 years.
Okay,
I think 2.
So good amount of time.
Senators serve a 6-year term.
Yeah.
And so I think and they stagger them. So now not every senator is up at the same time. Oh, you're a political science major. You don't need me to tell you this. And so
I forget that stuff more.
So I think he had 2 years left. I think that sounds right. Yeah. And left in his term. So we flip on the wire thinking we're going to hear all these contractors getting shaken down for bribes. What we really hear is Governor Blagojevich wrestling with himself about how he's going to monetize Barack Obama's Senate seat to his own benefit. Basically, he was trying to sell the position of senator for the state of Illinois to the highest bidder. And so our entire focus kind of switched from this shakedown of contractors to this Greek tragedy of this Hamlet-like governor on the phone all day long and in meetings all day long, talking to his closest advisors and his brother about how he's going to benefit himself by appointing someone to the Senate seat.
What was the room like when you're on that wiretap and you're hearing this? Is it like, that has to be just a holy shit moment where it just goes from like, it's going to be this to holy crap.
It was exactly that. It was, oh my God. And the first thing you got to do is tell the judge, right? The judge who signed the warrant, because the entire focus of that wiretap switched. And again, I was an agent on the wire. So I'm just a guy sitting there listening, kind of writing notes about what he's saying. And later I got promoted because I did a good job with my summaries into kind of supervising the wire of Governor Blagojevich's home. But we had case agents way smarter than I were who were actually managing the case itself. I never want to take credit for their work. They're the heroes of the story. And but it was my wire that was getting all the action. And so, he's going back and forth, and at some point he begins kind of working himself closer to accepting money from a group of people who are supporting a candidate to make that person senator. And so we have this dilemma on our hands of the team working this. Do we allow that to go through and have him appoint someone to the Senate who paid a bribe to do it? Right, that's really helpful for our case, right? Because we have a bribe.
It's game over,
yeah. We have a sitting governor accepting a bribe. What it's not good for are the people of Illinois, right? It becomes a moral dilemma. It becomes a constitutional crisis because you have a senator who was appointed, but to the Senate, who did it because he paid a bribe or had his intermediaries pay a bribe. And so what we decided to do collectively but ultimately the prosecutor's office said, we got to take it down. We got to take this down before, he's expressed his interest. He's dispatched his brother to make the deal for the bribe. And we ended up taking it down before that appointment to the Senate could happen, and we arrested the governor. Can
you highlight what the dilemma was? Because that part I've heard when I was listening, doing research on this, was so interesting because it's one of those things you don't really think about.
That's right. So what happens if the governor appoints someone to the Senate? That's a legal appointment. The governor's allowed to appoint someone to the Senate. There's no mechanism in place for the U.S. Department of Justice and the FBI to remove that senator from office. There's just no constitutional way to do that. And so then the state of Illinois would be saddled with a corrupt senator. Now there's processes in the Senate for them to throw out a senator, but it's like never been done. And so whereas if we took it down ahead of time, we're jeopardizing the quality of our case because now it's sort of like an attempted fraud versus an actual fraud, or attempted bribe versus an actual bribe. But it was the right thing to do for the people of Illinois.
What do you think? What were the conversations happening around that kind of constitutional debate there where you
Well, it was
guys?
a lot of us just sitting around the room talking about what to do. People at much higher levels of the Department of Justice weighing in. There was the gas pedal argument and the brake argument. The gas pedal is, let's let it go. Constitution be damned. Our job's to make the best criminal case possible. But I think you needed to pull that camera back and get a much wider view of what we were doing and say that what we're not going to do is poison the U.S. Senate by having a corrupt senator in there.
Was there any arguments for it being kind of weirdly an opportunity to kind of set a precedent where if you could have a corrupt official put someone in, it sets a precedent that you're able to just like, we're able to move them out? Like, was there that kind of debate as well?
Well, no, because again, there's
risk?
no constitutional mechanism to have the FBI or the U.S. Department of Justice remove a sitting senator.
Yeah, well, that's why, because
there's just not. I mean,
when it's open-ended like that,
we can sit and wish upon a star that the FBI has that kind of power, but we don't.
Yeah, that's incredible. So, I get what was the feeling when you're busting a governor of a state again? Like, this is just like massive crime. Like you're saying, there's just so much.
I've never told this story, but okay. So at the time, I was volunteering at a youth suicide hotline. And so every Monday night I would go in and take calls from suicidal kids in like a boiler room full of people. It's part of the.
Can I ask why you volunteered for that? If I don't,
it seemed like a nice thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just people volunteer their time.
Yeah.
I volunteered, and so every Monday night I would go take calls. It's now it's called the National Runaway Safe Line. It's for runaway kids. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If anyone is dealing with issues involving runaway or depressed kids or suicidal kids, and so I would go. So for years and years and years, I'd been taking calls from these kind of like runaway and suicidal kids, cutters, like bad stuff. And you get to know the people in the boiler room you're working with. And they were all a lot younger than me. And I remember, and so it was a Monday night, and we were doing their arrest, I think, on a Tuesday morning. And so I said to them, I go, guys, I can't tell you what this is about, but you got to watch the news tomorrow. And they're like, what's going to happen? I go, it's something so big that when it happens, there'll be no question in your mind. So if you hear about some car crash or some bank robbery and you're wondering, is that it? If you have to ask yourself, is that it? Then it's not it. Yeah. And then like, or maybe it was it was a day or two later. And then the next day, we arrest the sitting governor of Illinois in his home. And I wasn't on the arrest team. They had me go out and do a significant interview of the case as the arrest was occurring to kind of get the shock and awe of my interview. But so then the next week I went there, like, they're like, oh my God, you told us it was going to happen. It happened. I go, let's be clear, because I don't want to be investigated for this. I did not tell you it was going to happen. I said, something's going to happen. They're like, yeah, we knew exactly what it was. So my friends at the hotline had a good time with that.
That's awesome. Yeah. So,
and it was my only time I'd ever done that in my career, but I was so excited to see this thing being taken down, and I knew what a significant thing it would be for all residents of Illinois.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was the level of accomplishment? I mean, like we highlighted throughout this story, you get the dream job, you get the nerves because you're going through, all the different hurdles to get there. Yeah. And then you have some of these first, opening jobs, and, they end up opening up a whole nother doors where you're catching the Tango King, and, you're working with finding out about the mafia, having engagement. Now you're saving in a lot of ways, or you're helping save a state and the representation and like some of the fundamentals of what makes America, our democracy, our government. What was the feeling there of that kind of accomplishment?
When you're in the eye of the storm, you're not like patting yourself on the back. And also arresting the governor is just the first stage. You got to convict the guy.
True.
Right. And so, we arrest him, and then next thing, but he's still governor, right? It's not like you arrest him and he stops being governor. And so then the state legislator needed to basically throw him out of office, impeach him, and remove him from office. And during that window of time, he still can appoint someone to the Senate, which he does, but and was an honest man. And so, you're in the eye of the storm and you're kind of dealing with it. From my personal perspective, I liked it because I was working 16-hour days in that stupid wiretap, and I could stop. We took the wiretap down, and I got to get out there and start interviewing the people he was talking to on the wiretaps, trying to build evidence in the case. And so that's really how I spent the rest of my time on that case, was knocking on doors and interviewing people who were caught on the wiretap, and asking them questions. Okay, when you were talking to them, what did you know? Did you know this? Did you know that? What we and sort of getting it all squared away.
Were they different than some of the people you probably usually we're coming across just because.
Yeah, because they were all represented by high-powered attorneys.
Yeah. So what was the challenges there, the differences?
And I mean, you knock on someone's door, you'd say, I'd like to talk to you about the situation with the governor. And they go, yeah, I was expecting that. Listen, I engaged an attorney. Here's his card. You call the attorney, you go, hey, I want to talk to your guy. And I go, well, is he a target? And I go, nah, not really. I just want to find out what he knew. He was caught on the wire talking to the governor, but there's nothing wrong with talking to the governor. And then the lawyer brings a guy in and we talk. And so there was a lot of that again and again and again, rinse, repeat.
So when was the moment where you got to sit back and be like, this is a big one?
What happens, Reed, is this. I mean, the case marched on. I got transferred to Hawaii before the trial. Blagojevich goes to trial, and we got a hung jury. 11 jurors voted to convict him. One juror did not, and so it was a hung jury. Doesn't make him, it's not a not guilty verdict, and we had to retry him. It's the second time he was convicted.
How did they screw up that first? Like, what happened on that first one then?
I mean, why does that one juror, let's give her the benefit of the doubt, felt that the government did not rise to its burden of proof? I mean, the whole key of the defense was exactly what we thought it would be, that this thing never happened.
Yeah.
Right.
So they just straight up went with that. They didn't even
they said that he never took a bribe.
Yeah.
He never appointed someone illegally to the Senate because we took it down early.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and we knew that was coming, and they rammed it right up our ass. Mm-hmm. And one juror, seemed to like that argument, and I'll take her at her word that she felt that was gave her reasonable doubt that this crime had been committed, and so then the second trial happens and he's convicted and goes to prison for a long, long time.
How many years did he get?
It's a good question. I feel like it was like 15.
Okay,
but what happened was this: Blagojevich was never rich, and so during this window of time while he's awaiting trial, he goes on to a game show on NBC.
Oh,
the game show was called Celebrity Apprentice. Mm. And the game show host was this guy, kind of this clownish character out of New York who'd been in the tabloids for years, named Donald Trump.
I think I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, he went on to do a thing or two. And so Blagojevich goes on the show, he's on the game show and all that, and then he gets convicted, goes to prison. While he's in prison, cooling his jets there, that game show host becomes president of the U.S., And say what you will about Donald Trump. This is a guy who respects loyalty. If you're a good guy to Donald Trump, he likes you. If you're a bad guy to Donald Trump or you criticize him, he doesn't like you. He remembered this embattled governor who had gone on his show, and Trump commutes his sentence and lets him out.
What year was that? Do you know? Like relatively recently?
Yeah. I mean, Trump was only president for 4 years, right? So it was one of those 4 years.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So how many?
About halfway through, I think the Trump. I remember, being in Florida, hearing about it, and just kind of laughing. I'm like, well, the president can commute or pardon anyone he wants for any reason he wants. It doesn't have to be a good reason. And I wasn't bent out of shape. It's not like I get the license plates that Blagojevich was making when he was in prison. So what do I care? Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I mean that is funny, man. The connections like that. I guess this kind of brings me to one of the questions that I had as well. Often people get mad because they see with this case, of course, but punishment on white collar crime, some people think is oftentimes just, it doesn't meet what it should. I mean, 15 years, this is why I asked that, is because, usually you're looking at like 3 years, 5 years, something like that. And even, the 2008 crisis, which I'd be interested to hear, what
the mortgage crisis.
Yeah. What you felt. Yeah. Cause you guys are obviously front and center for seeing all this. People often get pretty pissed because, they feel like they're getting duped, and then,
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Okay. So let's use an example. I worked a lot of investment fraud cases and a lot of embezzlement cases. Those are my favorite kind of cases then and now. And they were kind of the heart of most of my financial crimes work, other than the first 6 years in bank fraud. Let's leave that aside. But same difference. Someone steals $250,000 from a small business. That small business is like rocked on their heels. Maybe they have to go out of business. Maybe they can survive it. I investigate the case. Bad guy goes away. $250,000. You're probably looking at 18 to 24 months. Okay. Right? As opposed to the bank robber, who's like a homeless guy who writes a bank robbery note on crayon on a paper bag saying, like, give me your money, I have a gun. That guy, because he threatens a gun, is going away for like 10 years. It's crazy. So there's an argument to be made that white collar crime sentences aren't high enough. And I'm not unsympathetic to that argument. But the one thing people are forgetting is restitution. As part of every white collar crime sentence, financial crimes, that is, they're also they get sent to prison. They have a period of probation afterwards in the federal system that's called supervised release. But they're also sentenced to pay restitution to the victims, right? Pay back the victims for the money they stole. Most of the time, there's no, unless they buy a car or a house or like have all the money in their mattress, the FBI will try to recover that during the course of the investigation. But most people are stealing money so they could spend it. Maybe it's vacations, maybe it's drugs, maybe it's gambling, maybe it's something. So there's usually not money to be seized in 99% of the cases. And so what happens is they get out of prison in 18 to 24 months, and now they begin having their wages garnished, portion of their paycheck that goes to the victim. And so we could say the problem is that their earning potential is so severely diminished by the time they get out of prison. The money that is going to the victims is de minimis. But if we put that guy in prison for 10 years, that's 10 years that the victim is not going to be able to get some money for restitution. Mm-hmm. So that's one argument that says maybe shorter sentences are better, and this short 18 to 24 months is a better idea than putting them away forever, because the sooner they can get out and get gainful employment, the sooner they can begin paying back their victim. That's one argument. You follow that argument?
Yep.
Okay. Second argument is the recidivism, the idea that most of the people that I investigated except for the hardcore kind of repeat con men, and they exist out there, but most of the people, especially the embezzlers, this is their first rodeo, right? These aren't frequent flyers in the criminal justice system. And their lives are devastated, right? Their kids are ashamed. Their wife's probably going to leave them. Their name is mud. They're going to have me on Instagram telling the story about them that's going to live on forever. Right? It's going to be a terrible situation for them, and their lives are basically ruined, and they have to spend some time rebuilding their lives. But the idea of them going back and then stealing from a second employer is really low. Like most of them don't come back for more. They've learned their lesson, and they're just trying to rebuild their lives. And so then it's a question as you as the taxpayer, now we've punished this person by putting them away in prison, away from their wife and kids and family for 24 months. And they get out, and now no one will hire them for jobs. And so what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to put that person away for 5 years instead of 2 years. Or keep in mind, you and I, the taxpayers, have to foot the bill for them, right?
Yeah.
They get a wart on their foot from the prison bathroom. We got to pay for that plantar wart to be removed. And the care and feeding of these people in the criminal justice system isn't cheap. So that's another argument for it. And so what are we really getting by extending these sentences, other than sort of like the emotional thrill of punishing them more? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I used to be really into the idea that we need to sentence these people to longer terms, but I've kind of given up on that. I don't think that's necessarily the right thing to do.
Do you think there's a fair case to be made that we need to be more aggressive in terms of like who? So the 2008 crisis is a really good example because so many people, for lack of a better word, got fucked over, like very bad.
Absolutely.
And I've seen figures where it talks about like suicides caused by it, like massive. It's
people lost their homes.
Crazy situation. And there was a very clear display of financial manipulation and, people that ended up not really seeing any time for it.
Yeah.
And then, there's even, you get the circumstances, which talks about the group behind Xanax, Purdue, or like examples like that, where people are like, these guys at, millions, billions, and they're just getting away with a slap on the wrist. So do you think there's a level that we could be more aggressive on those, where it's like,
yeah, but the problem is that a lot of those things aren't crimes. I think the mortgage crisis is a perfect example. It was perfectly legal to take a bunch of crappy mortgages and then securitize them, and then have the bond rating companies give them good ratings, because that's just someone's opinion, right? The fact that everyone kind of fell in line and said that these securitized bonds made up of these crappy mortgages are worth something, that's all of our faults as a society. So a lot of these things just aren't crimes. You know what is a crime? That mortgage broker who's out there creating fake W-2s and 1099s and pay stubs that allow you to get the mortgage. So as the FBI agent, That's the guy I'm going to go after. I know we're all upset at Goldman Sachs and the big banks and the credit rating agencies that did this, but fact of the matter is, what they did doesn't fall neatly into any Title 18 statute.
Yeah.
The FBI doesn't get to make the laws. Call your congressman.
No, I get that too. That's what. It's just funny because I get when people are pissed and then they hear that the guys, no punishment came or anything like that. And I think it's a really fair point.
It's totally a fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sympathetic to the argument, but the problem is I'm hamstrung as the agent by the laws that Congress has passed, right? If Congress had passed a law saying that it's absolutely illegal for a corporation to give an A+ rating to bonds, bonds that are made of crappy mortgages, if they know about it, that'd be great. I'd love to lock all these guys up.
Yeah.
But the problem is that's just not, that a bond rating is solely an opinion, and you're allowed to have crappy opinions.
So what was your guys' reaction during 2007, 2008, when shit hit the fan? Like,
it was a lot of work. It was drinking from a fire hose, right? Because we're dealing with all these foreclosures, and we're trying to reverse engineer the foreclosed properties with how did this mortgage come to be, and were there false documents submitted to the banks funding these mortgages? And then we have the problem of some really crappy, unsympathetic victims, because our victims are the banks ultimately, right? And so you're some poor guy. A predatory mortgage broker puts you into a subprime mortgage by creating false documentation. You sign off on that mortgage. We're not going to go after you, right? The FBI just made an executive decision. We're not going after the poor man in this situation. Anyone who's lying to their mortgage broker with their mortgage broker's help to get housing is not a sympathetic victim. Now, if they're doing it as an investment scheme, like bringing in straw buyers and things like that, we're happy to go after those people. But we're going to go after the mortgage brokers. Right? And if the banks, if we can find bankers who were doctoring these documents or had knowledge that we could prove, we're pushing mortgages through with fake pay stubs, fake W-2s, fake 1099s, establishing income for this poor guy who wanted the house. We're happy to go after that banker. But the problem is that mortgage loan, once it gets up into the securitization pool of bonds, and then the credit rating agencies are saying that this is A+, that just wasn't the crime. So we went after the highest level of people we could, while leaving the poor guy who lost his house alone.
What were some of there's obviously some policy changes that happened within, the SEC, and just like making sure that, we actually had proper regulations to kind of deal with this type of stuff. Was there any policy change or switches that happened in the FBI that maybe was like, towards investigative purposes, or ways for you guys to maybe look at some of these items that could be coming down the line that could be creating this?
No, not really. I mean, have you gotten a mortgage?
No, working on it.
It's like a proctology exam now. So, I mean, I think the industry reacted in such a way that they're no longer doctoring up fake documents, because the amount of proof I needed to do to get my mortgage was insane. And it made me think, like, as I'm going through all this, like trying to find tax returns and like pay stubs, and they're trying to confirm my employment at the FBI, which is a pain in the ass, right? Because no one wants to do that. I was thinking, like, my God, I feel like just a few years ago, I'm working these cases where these homeless guys are being put into these stupid McMansions with fake pay stubs, and no one cared in the banking industry. They were happy to just push it through because they weren't going to be living with the risk. And so I think society kind of clamped down on that. I mean, there may be some dirty mortgage companies out there and dirty mortgages getting written, but it's certainly nothing like it was back in 2008 and before that.
Yeah, thank Christ. That was crazy.
Yeah.
We're going to get to this in a little bit, but crypto is kind of the new domain for that. And I know you're a huge fan, so we'll get to that soon. But so you're moving from Chicago to Hawaii.
Yeah, so go to Hawaii.
Finally going to good weather. What was the feeling there?
Oh, I loved it. Hawaii was great. It was like
why Hawaii? I know this was interesting. There was originally kind of a debate, and Hawaii, weirdly enough, isn't popular for FBI agents.
FBI agents don't want to go to Hawaii, and that's because it's crazy expensive. It's insanely expensive. There's nothing grown or made in Hawaii. Like, you get a pineapple from the grocery store, it's brought in from Chile, and so the gasoline that goes in your tank is super expensive. Everything's expensive in Hawaii. The land underneath your feet costs a fortune, and the houses are crap, and the schools are poor there. They're not well funded. They're not doing a good job of educating the children of Hawaii. So what happens is people who are working for the FBI there end up sending their kids to private school. And the increase in an FBI agent's pay in Hawaii does not cover all these additional costs. And then the other stressor is proximity to extended family. It sucks if your mom's in Illinois and she's getting old and you have to fly back to see her. You're flying around the world. Yeah. And a lot of FBI agents, male and female, have spouses who want to be professionals, and the professional work sector in Hawaii is not great. And so, your wife is has a great job, and she has to leave that to go to Hawaii, and there's just no there's fewer great jobs there. And so every now and then what the FBI does is they canvass every FBI agent in America and say, hey, anyone want to go to Hawaii? And
that's just so funny to think like any other person would hear that.
Well, vacationing, there's and they get a lot of people who originally raise their hands and then kind of get the rude awakening once they actually talk to a realtor and stuff like that. But what happens for me is my wife and I, we made the decision, let's do this, let's have an adventure. And so we raised our hands, looked into it, bought some crappy house, put the kids in Catholic school, and went to Hawaii for 7 years. And it was great because it was a very young office, but by that point I had been an agent for 13 years. Yeah. And you're
still young.
I was 33 years old.
Yeah. You're probably younger than a lot of guys starting, right?
Yeah. It was great. Was I 33? I don't know what I was. It was great. And so, fell in with a bunch of young, super energetic agents who wanted me to be their training agents and kind of teach them how to do interviews and interrogation, kind of build cases. Had aggressive prosecutors there who wanted good cases from agents, and so it was great. It was like the pinnacle of my career, and I wasn't so. The financial crime agents who were there, very good agents, still friends. They were working the mortgage fraud stuff. I didn't really like the mortgage fraud stuff for all the reasons we discussed. Mostly the unsympathetic victims and the fact that what are we doing? Why am I trying to champion these banks as victims when the banks didn't give a damn? But we had all these cases that were just kind of sitting there piling up in the world of Ponzi schemes and investment frauds. And I loved investments, and so I decided to start taking those on, and I just started making tons of cases of investment frauds. It was great.
So what was the immediate difference in crimes that you were operating on that you saw from Hawaii to Chicago? Because Chicago, they're just so different.
Right.
It's like
the corruption was more, the political corruption among police and local government in Hawaii was more of a friends and family program where the police would give you a break if you were running an illegal gambling operation because you went to high school with that guy's brother. Whereas Chicago, the police give you a break if you're running an illegal gambling operation because you hand that cop an envelope full of cash.
Really? Okay.
That's the difference. And so much harder cases to prove
in
the corruption area, but that wasn't my thing, right? I was an investment fraud agent, but we only had one white collar crime squad. So the guy sitting next to me was doing was doing the public corruption cases and the police corruption cases and stuff like that. And so you had your nose in a lot of that stuff, but it was just a very different culture than Chicago in that regard.
Was the investment fraud, like if you look at the real estate market there, obviously it's super inflated, was there just a different type of frauds that were going on around that kind of area?
Yeah. I was working a lot of investment frauds, many of which were Ponzi schemes. We can talk about what that means if you care. But the people of Hawaii, nicest people in the world, such good people, and they know a lot about what they know about. But one of the industries that has never been promoted there was kind of finance. It's just not. It wasn't like you go to Chicago. Your next door neighbors at the Chicago Board Options Exchange. You go to New York. There's a guy who's a trader at the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. There's nothing like that in Hawaii. So the people there, I'm not calling them stupid, but they're not sophisticated when it comes to finance and investing, which made them easy prey for kind of Sharpies from the U.S. mainland to come to town and offer them 6% a week on this investment in foreign currency. And it sounds perfectly reasonable to them. And they would, get a mortgage on their houses and give them their life savings and just get all their money lost and lose their houses and stuff like that. So I kept seeing that again and again and again in these cases. And I finally, for the first time in my career, Reed, had sympathetic victims, right? Had human being victims who had lost everything due to their own poor judgment, but still human victims who wanted to better their lives and better the lives of their families, investing money with this person who lied to them And so I had victims calling me saying, hey, how's my case going? I had people giving me a hug at sentencing. I had people giving me a hug, victims who would like be crying, and I'd have to hand them tissues. They never had the bank fraud. That was never the case. There was no one at Citibank who was like in the fetal position crying because they had lost a couple $100,000 in an embezzlement scheme. But these little old ladies and these families in Hawaii who had lost everything in these scams, I came to really kind of want to champion them.
I was going to say, did that, you're already well into your career at this point. You would think that I've seen everything, done everything. Was that just like a reinvigorating feeling?
Totally. It breathed new life into it because there were people, there were flesh and blood people that sometimes I'd see at the grocery store in my little community that were counting on me to be their champion.
Yeah. Did it start becoming more, you highlighted this at the beginning, the best feeling at the end is to see the guy in the orange jumpsuit. Did it start becoming that the best feeling in the end is to see, at least some retribution for these people?
Yeah. Yeah. And if I could seize assets and get that money back to the victims, they sure appreciated that.
Yeah. That's awesome. So jumping into Ponzi schemes, can you maybe explain what makes a good Ponzi scheme and, what were some of the early ones that you started seeing when you were out there?
Sure. A Ponzi scheme historically comes from a guy named Charles Ponzi. He lived in Boston. But what it really means is any investment fraud where I'm lying to you to get money from you, and you give me money, and I'm promising you rates of return, say 10% a month, double your money in 90 days, whatever that is. And I'm actually paying you those investment returns. But that money that I'm paying you is not being derived from any actual investment activity or any income producing activity. All I'm doing is giving your money back to you a little bit at a time to create the illusion of investment returns. Now, me as the bad guy, why am I doing that? I'm doing that because you're going to tell your friends and family that you're getting your 6% a week on this investment. And so, and then it begins spreading virally. And so I'm taking money and I'm giving it back to the people. Well, I'm taking a giant hunk of that money and putting it in my pocket and spending it. Again, I've invested nothing. And it creates this pyramid effect where as long as there's new people coming in, investing their money with me, the bad guy, and I keep paying them a portion of that money that's invested back, creating the illusion of investment returns, it's going to spread and spread and spread. And as long as there's new investors coming in, I can continue paying you returns. And sometimes you actually make money in a Ponzi scheme if you're an early investor.
Yeah, it happened with Madoff. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. Tons of people there made a fortune.
Yeah.
And so, but what happens is just the math of it starts to be unsustainable, and it's going to collapse under its own weight when new investors just aren't coming in the door. And then it becomes like a run on the bank, and then everyone's calling me asking for their money, and I've already taken their money and bought a boat with it, went to gamble with it, use cocaine with it, whatever. And so then they collapse, and everybody's, then the FBI gets the call. Then my phone starts ringing at my desk.
So what makes a good Ponzi scheme? Would you say it's the calculus behind the actual scheme, or is it the schemer himself?
The credibility of the lie that's being told underlying it, right? Because everybody hears these stories about crypto investing these days. But, in my day it was more like stocks. Your average guy in Hawaii, maybe he's not super versed in stocks. Maybe he doesn't know about foreign currency trading, but he's heard these terms Forex and stuff like that. And so there's the underlying lie about what the money is going to be invested in. And if that has credibility, that Ponzi scheme is going to have legs. And you want to offer, I feel like I'm giving your viewers a how-to lesson on how to run an effective Ponzi scheme. But
that's going to be the video.
Yeah. The most successful Ponzi schemes gave above market rates of return and promised zero risk, right? Those two things don't happen in the real world,
Nope.
right? Like I could go to Las Vegas and put $100 on red or black, and my likelihood of losing that is about 50-50, a little less because the green, but that's how it works. And so the real world, high rates of return, doubling your money, is coupled with high risk. There's always an imbalance in these Ponzi schemes. So they're offering people a high rate of return and telling them there's no risk whatsoever of them losing their money.
So how critical is the guy behind the scheme? The whatever you'd call, I guess, the guy at the top of the pyramid.
And how much charisma does he need to have to fool people?
Like, how important for it to be a successful Ponzi scheme? Because obviously you can't just pick any jerk off on the street and say, hey, you want to make millions? Like there's every story is always like, this is the guy.
The successful Ponzi schemes happen because they are ultimately affinity frauds. And what that means is that it's someone from your affinity group. It's Madoff the Jew ripping off rich Jews in his community. It's my Mormon guy ripping off the Mormons. It's the Filipino ripping off the Filipinos. It's the Pop Warner football mom ripping off other Pop Warner football moms. Once someone is part of your little subgroup, your little affinity group that that you identify yourself with, the idea of them stealing from you is unthinkable. And so that's why they work.
So it's a development of like trust that you can kind of, or
it's not even trust. It's the trust based on the identity politics or the identities that we see ourselves in, right? Like, Roman Catholic guy, grew up Roman Catholic, went to Roman Catholic church and all that. The idea of someone from my church actually ripping me off, he's not going to do that because the guy goes to my church. I can certainly trust another Catholic. Once people got into that kind of tribal mindset, then they were just easy marks for the Ponzi schemers.
So let's get into one of the biggest cases for the Ponzi schemes. And I got to read this name because I know I'm going to screw this one up too. Let's see. Oh man, where did I put it? Oh, Perry and is it Rochelle Griggs.
Yeah.
This one's, it's pretty incredible. And also the kind of going for what we're talking about. It's if someone's got a tongue on them, they can make something happen.
Right, sure. This is the movie of the week, right? When someone makes me famous as Frank Abagnale, this is my Catch Me If You Can. And they made an episode of American Greed on this that people can go back and watch if they.
Link will be below.
Yeah, well, I don't know where it is, but you can probably find it.
Yeah, there's some research.
But Perry Griggs was a Ponzi schemer and kind of a lifelong con man, and he had this beautiful wife named Rochelle Griggs, and so he gets put in prison for a Ponzi scheme. I think Secret Service worked the case, and they did a nice job. He went away for like 8 years. He was assigned to Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas, and which had its own prison on the base.
Is that common?
Like a work camp.
Is that like common for these bases to have prison attached?
No, this was just unusual. They've since closed it down.
Okay.
And so Perry Griggs is locked up with a bunch of prisoners from Hawaii. They're on drug crime, federal crimes, and at the work camp. The prisoners from Hawaii were really Perry Griggs really charmed them. He's a charming guy, and he would tell them these stories about how he was this billionaire commodities trader, and he was really in jail for some tax offenses or money laundering or something like that. And he offered to help them by investing their money while he was inside the prison. And he had the prison wired. His wife, Rochelle, was bribing the guards with cigars and gifts and cash. And so he was being taken off base to have sex with her and stuff at a local motel and get brought back. It was outrageous. The prisoners from Hawaii were just impressed by him. They'd never seen anybody who had the system wired who was such a good talker.
Why were is it unusual for the COs to be kind of that easily coerced?
Yeah, part of it, no. The Federal Bureau of Prisons is one of the best run prisons in America as far as a lack of corruption. But you only need one guy. And also I think some of the people turning their heads were military people who were assigned. It would be assigned to
guard duty,
who got guard duty and were basically functioning as work camp supervisors. Mm-hmm. They were at the time renovating a warehouse, I believe, on Nellis. And so some of the work camp supervisors were just military guys they didn't care about their job was not to house the prisoners. It was to supervise this work camp project. And so some combination of that. But the Bureau of Prisons is not a corrupt agency. But it only takes one or two guys. And so Perry's got all these privileges. He tells the Hawaii guys he wants to help them invest money so they could take care of their families while they're inside. The Hawaii prisoners are like, hey, that's great. We would love to invest money with you, but we're broke. We're sitting in prison. Our families are suffering. And Perry had an idea. He said, listen, your families are broke, but you talked about your house that's been in your family for generations. Why don't you go get cash out mortgages on your house and then take that money, give it to me and Rochelle. Rochelle will take care of the actual handling the money and taking care of giving you guys your investment returns. I'll be here on my laptop inside the prison. He had a laptop that worked, and I'll trade the commodities. We'll make a fortune. And so that's exactly what happened. A bunch of the Hawaii prisoners ended up getting mortgages on their houses, getting the money to Rochelle, who began just living really high off the hog.
Just jumping for that. When you hear, just the beginning of that case, just how that starts, like when you look back on this person, so Perry, like, is it just, I think you have to have a level of like psychopathy to just know that, not are they investing their money and they're going to lose it. Like they're taking out a mortgage on the house and then investing it, which is just it's basically double jeopardy there, where you're getting hit twice. Not even losing your savings.
Well, I mean, some of these people lost their houses.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Right. I mean, they couldn't. Rochelle was paying their mortgages for them as in this form of Ponzi scheme returns, but that money ran out, and Rochelle was living pretty high off the hog at the time, and she was flying back and forth to Vegas to be with Perry and all that. And so Perry gets out of prison and then disappears, just takes off. And again, not my problem. My phone begins to ring from all these victims, most of whom had family members in prison with Perry at one point, and from these little old ladies telling me that they had invested money with a man in federal prison. And I was like, excuse me, say that again. That seems odd. And
is this a prank call?
Right. So I got two problems on my hands. I have the prove up this case and get a grand jury indictment so I can get an arrest warrant for him. And then I had the where the hell is Perry Griggs problem, because Perry and Rochelle had just taken off after he got out of prison. And he wasn't running from me. I think he was running from these Hawaii prisoners who were also getting out, as their sentences were done. And so I built this case against him, proving that it was all a big Ponzi scheme, talking to co-conspirators. There were some other characters who were kind of funneling investment, who were doing their own investment fraud scheme, but funneling the money to Perry. It was a whole fiasco. Eventually I get a federal grand jury indictment, and which comes with an arrest warrant for Perry, and I begin this nationwide manhunt to catch him. One of the tools that I used in that was we had a relationship with a company called Clear Channel, which used to own all the radio stations in the U.S. But what a lot of people don't know is that they're also the largest owner of billboards in the U.S. And Clear Channel agreed to put pictures of Perry and Rochelle Griggs all around America on their electronic billboards, the billboards that change every couple minutes, with my desk phone number on it. And so I remember that summer, my phone was ringing off the hook with these well-meaning people saying, hey, I saw that Perry and Rochelle Griggs driving down the road, and they give me the license plates. I pull it up. It'd be a very nice looking, like, black couple. Perry and Rochelle are white people. And so just tons and tons of leads that just kind of went nowhere.
Did they have like recognizable qualities, or were they very much like?
She was a good looking blonde lady. He was a, normal looking white guy with gray hair.
So I mean, could lose him in a crowd if it
totally. There was nothing about them that, like, he wasn't like 12 feet tall or didn't have like a hook nose or anything like that. He was just a normal looking dude. And so I developed a couple leads. One lead was that they were somewhere in Arizona. I'd heard that again and again and again. And another lead was that I heard that he was doing odd jobs for a living and had run out of money, which made sense because when you're just doing the math on the mortgage payments plus what Rochelle was spending, I knew there wasn't a whole lot of Ponzi money left. And so, the third thing I got, which is pretty late in the investigation, was a phone number. And so I did this sophisticated investigative technique. I Googled the phone number. And the first thing that popped up was a Craigslist ad from Kingman, Arizona. We'll paint your house for cash. Call Rex at this number. I'm like, okay, well, this is Arizona. It's odd jobs. It's Rex, which is a dog's name, not a human name. Yeah. And so sent an undercover agent out there to call Rex to have him paint this motel. And who comes walking up but a guy with a bucket of paint and a paintbrush. And it turns out that he was the guy who ran the rooming house for Perry. Grabbed that guy. They're like, well, that's not him. And then squeeze him. And he tells us that Perry's living in his rooming house with Rochelle. They went over there and arrested them both and brought them to Hawaii. And I got to debrief them for a few days and have them tell me their story.
What was that debrief like?
It's fascinating. Yeah. Honestly, I didn't need it for the case. I wanted it to understand this guy and kind of get in his head and understand how they could do what they do and how he was so good at separating people from their money. Yeah. And he was a master, the best I ever investigated.
Why do you think he was the best you ever investigated?
There was a point when he gets out of prison, he's out of money altogether. They're trying to figure out how to go. What bankrolled their trip is, I think it was in California, Nevada. He walks into a golf pro shop, strikes up a conversation with the golf pro, walks out with 50 grand of the golf pro's money who wanted to make an investment in something or other and use that to bankroll their flight into fugitive. This guy was so good at talking you out of your money and just being able to sit across the table for 8 hours and just kind of pick his brain and talk to him and get the whole story down. And Rochelle in a separate conversation about what she believed and what she was like and why she was under his spell for so long. because she had no criminal history.
Yeah.
And it was just fascinating. It was so instructive.
So I get that was actually a question I was going to ask. So it kind of ties perfect into it. Is that what is needed to make the perfect financial criminal, white collar criminal, whatever it might be? It sounds like I'm giving out a recipe, but it's just curious on this. Would you say it's intelligence? Would you say it's almost a lack of it, where they're just at that medium where they have so much confidence that they can do anything? Like, what do you think that type of makeup for someone like Perry that makes them so unique? Like, what are those aspects?
I think the perfect con man takes the time to understand what's important to you and builds that rapport with you, and then tries to understand where your vulnerabilities are. Are you a guy who knows a lot about finance? Are you a guy who maybe has a kid who's getting ready to go into college? Are you, maybe that's the idea. And if you're worried about finances, maybe that's the angle that he twists to, like, hey, listen, you seem like a really good guy. I know you don't know me and I don't know you, but I feel connected with you. I want to do you a solid. I can invest your money and double that in like just a few weeks in this commodities thing that I do. I've done it for a lot of people. Most of my clients are really, really rich. But just talking to you, I could tell that you're a family man, and I don't have any daughters of my own. I'd really like to be able to help you get your daughter through college. That type of thing, figuring out what's important to you, leveraging that, and monetizing it is what con men do best. The best con men do, at least.
Do you think there's a level of, like, I keep saying psychopathy, but just some type of emotional, like when you usually are in the room with them after, is there ever a sense of remorse, or are they usually like, I did what I had to do?
No, the remorse is that it went bad. They're dreamers, right? Somehow something's going to happen to make this right. When we started out our conversation talking about interrogations and how I got good at it. And the way I get good at it is because I try to figure out, what do people tell themselves to rationalize their bad behavior? Because Reed, nobody is the villain in their own life story, right? So that lady who's embezzling money from the bank, that teller who's taking money every day, in her mind, she's borrowing that money. She's going to put it back someday when she wins the lottery or has some windfall. And so if I could figure out what they tell themselves that allow them to look at themselves in the mirror in the morning, I can leverage that to get them to tell me the truth. Because I'm going to say to them, listen, either you were stealing this money because you wanted to party and use cocaine and drink and go to Vegas, or you were borrowing this money because you had some serious financial stress in your life and you fully intended to pay it back, but then it all kind of went bad and you got caught before you did. Which was it? Are you some animal who wanted to party? Or are you a good person who was just borrowing the money from the teller drawer? They'll always pick the lesser of those two options. And so that's my big interrogation trick. But it's based in reality, and it's based in the psychology of the bad guy and the fact that they tell themselves lies that make them feel like they're not bad people.
Do you ever, so when you're doing the interrogation, I feel like a lot of people, they have the good cop, bad cop, and you have an ability to almost do both, where you're saying, like, I break down who the person is. When you're going into the room, like, what's your mindset with that and how I'm thinking about this individual?
You do your homework ahead of time, right? You're trying to understand who this person is. And then you're basically going to try to understand, again, like I said, you're trying to understand what is it they tell themselves. And you're going to get their side of the have them tell you the story. They're going to lie to you. They're going to say, I didn't do it. And then you're going to say, well, listen, I know you did it because I've been reviewing the evidence. There's a financial crime, right? It's not whether you did it or not. We're past that. But what I need to understand is why you did it. And then I get into my little rap, what usually boils down to two options: one that makes them a monster, one that makes them sympathetic, and they'll usually head toward the sympathetic one. And so that's my big interrogation trick. So free to your viewers today on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm telling you, we're making the perfect criminal. So
I know. Okay.
No, I mean, it's important though, because again, it's on TV. People are like, "Oh, it's good cop, bad cop." But
good cop, bad cop's like, that's 1950 stuff. That's like Army field manual stuff. That anyone who's doing good cop, bad cop in 2024 is ridiculous.
Yeah, well, the way you highlight that too, it's like the psychology of the individual. Once you get into that, you'll find the solution if you trained enough and you have at least a little bit of ambition into looking.
You got to have that non-judgmental attitude, right? You're not there to punish them. My job's not to punish anyone. It's just to find out what happened. And so if I'm non-judgmental, I'm truly trying to show empathy and understand your worldview. And that's whether it's an embezzler, whether it's someone who harms children. You want to make sure that you're seeing the world through their eyes for that conversation and trying to understand what is it they tell themselves. Someone who harms children, as the interrogator, you may decide to say something that you don't believe yourself. Like, these girls are being seductive to you, weren't they? It's something I find morally reprehensible, right? I want to jump across the table, rip that guy's throat out. But if you present it like that, maybe that's what that guy tells himself, is that these girls that he's harming are being seductive, and that's why he does bad things to children. It's not that he has, not that he's this evil character. I happen to believe he's an evil character, but my job is to get that confession. And so you try to see the world through the bad guy's eyes. How does he rationalize his behavior? And then leverage that.
Have you had a time where it was really difficult to separate that? Or, the example you were just giving, like, if you have that, I feel like even if you were to do that, there would be a moment after where you'd really have to, like, you need a few days off where you got to be like, I got to collect myself.
Yeah, I mean, these are heavy things, right? I had a guy throw his girlfriend off the railing of a cruise ship over the railing, and he killed her on the first night of a cruise. And so, it's a totally reprehensible act. I mean, this is a woman in the prime of life. But during my interrogation, I needed to kind of see the world through his eyes and say, listen, you didn't get on that cruise to kill her for insurance money, did you? No, of course not. You're not a bad person. I'm looking into your eyes right now. I know you're not a bad person. The reason you did that was probably because you guys got into a fight and she was driving you up your wall. And trust me, I've been married, man. I know how it is when a woman drives you up the wall and she's just coming at you. And you were drinking too much and you lost your mind for a second. Next thing you know, she's going over the railing and you must feel terrible about that. And I bet if you had a time machine, you could do it differently. Wouldn't you say? And then, And so you're seeing the world through their eyes and understand that they're scared. They're being interrogated by an FBI agent, and you're putting them at ease by being a nice guy and being cool. There's no upside to shaming them and being mean to them during the course of an interrogation. If you treat people with respect and you try to see the world how they see it, and try to understand them, people want to tell you their stories. They want to tell you why they're not a bad person, even though they did a bad thing.
Do you find it difficult to turn that switch off then after? Like, I feel like this is a skill.
I get so into it's not my job to punish. I mean, obviously I feel terrible for the victims. I feel terrible for the victim's family, especially when there's a loss of life or a person who's been severely hurt. But I take comfort in the fact that there's a criminal justice system out there that's fully equipped to punish them, and it's not my job to punish them. But yeah, the missing kids cases, they're the ones that, you got kids of your own, you stay up at night, you're thinking about that, it gives you a stomach ache, you feel terrible, maybe you cry. So yeah, I've had those cases.
So let's get into what makes the perfect victim then, because I feel like this might be the most important takeaway from people, where it's what makes a good victim, what are the common places you see with victims, and adding to that, what do you see people most commonly fall for, and what are ways of avoidance that people can kind of act in their life to not fall victim?
Sure. Let's talk about investments, because that's sort of where most individuals are going to get ripped off, and the people watching here. If you can't explain in full detail exactly what you're investing in, you shouldn't be investing in it. Start there, right? Because a lot of these investments that are being offered, especially the fraudulent ones, are incredibly complicated in their explanation, and that's by design. And so a lot of my victims had a difficult time articulating to me what exactly they were investing in, because all they're focused on is the rates of return that are being promised, right? These astronomical rates of return. And again, as we said earlier, the other tell is these victims is they're happy to fall for the idea of high rates of return with low risk, two things that don't exist in the same universe with each other, but it's a commonality in nearly every investment fraud case. They're mesmerized by the affinity group that they're within, right? There's no way this guy would rip me off because I'm Filipino, and the guy is part of my Filipino community. He's the president of the Filipino Chamber of Commerce. There's no way that this investment could be fraudulent. And I guess those are the big ones that I would tell people to watch out for when it comes to investment fraud. And there's just no such thing as get rich quick. If a deal seems too good to be true, it truly is too good to be true.
Do you think that there should be more push for people to be more financially educated?
Yeah, I would love to see high schools teach a financial literacy class.
Yeah.
The stuff I learned in high school that I don't really apply to much of anything. I mean, put a gun to my head, I couldn't tell you what trigonometry is. But I'm not an engineer, and so it's just but financial, the financial literacy, or, how checks work, or, how to pay your taxes. I think there could be a really good class that's taught to high school kids about sort of basic financial literacy to prepare them for the adult world that they're going to be thrust into, as opposed to some of the other things maybe we're spending our time on. I think that would be a good idea, but I'm not a public policy guy, so I don't know how that works.
Well, no, I mean, I agree, because I think it's not even people falling for faulty, like for Ponzi schemes or investment fraud or anything. It's just people making stupid decisions with their money in general. It's like,
it is, yeah. And I got that a lot. Like you would get a lot of skepticism from the other agents. Like, why are you, these people are greedy and stupid, your victims. But I'm like, listen, you can't steal money from greedy and stupid people, right? In fact, like, stupid people need to be protected.
Yeah.
No, we don't do that with women. Like, if a woman's walking around in a mini skirt and a low top and she gets, you'd be a monster to say that she was asking for it, she deserved it. Well, this person who's unsophisticated in the world of finances, who gets taken by some con artist lying to them to separate them from their money, I believe they're deserving of your sympathy too. And even if they're not deserving of your sympathy, maybe then the bad guy is deserving of your scorn.
Yeah. Well, I also too, most of the time, I mean, you highlight this, it's often not people with tons of money to just blow.
No,
like,
most of my victims were not super wealthy.
Yeah.
These were victims who were spending their last penny on trying to better themselves.
And when you're in that level of poverty, that low income, it's so easy for people with money to hear get rich quick and be like, that's stupid.
Right. Especially in Hawaii, right, where everybody is struggling financially.
Mm-hmm.
You got 10 people living in your tiny little house for multiple generations just to make ends meet. And then you look down the street and you see some guy who's living large, and that envy is a real thing, and it's a real driver. And the idea that there's some magic button, this belief that the rich have some secret skill, some secret program that they could get into, is alluring to them.
Yeah, especially with finance. That's the other thing too, is you hear all these, you're talking about someone comes over and is like talking about, I can trade over here. We're going to be doing these commodities. We're going to be moving here. It's like, well, that sounds big. So clearly it must be. Yeah. And it's what's happening now with crypto too, which like we can dive into intersect. But I did want to ask, because we're kind of doing some wrap up with like the victims, those behind the Ponzi schemes. What was your biggest regret, or the thing you look back on with kind of resentment at the FBI, in terms of something that the biggest regret throughout your career was something that you wish that you could get back? Or if there was like a moment where you
like
said
unsolved cases?
Yeah, something like that.
Sure. No, I have a bunch of unsolved cases that still haunt me. There was there's an island in the South Pacific called Saipan. It's part of the Northern Marianas Islands. You as a taxpayer may not know it, but they are your countrymen. It is a U.S. territory. We took it from the Japanese after World War II. The native people there are the Chamorro, and it's a very popular vacation destination for Japanese tourists. But it's part of your country. It's part of the U.S. There were two little girls, the Luke sisters, who one day were waiting for a school bus, and they disappeared and were never seen again. And so then the local police begin looking for these two missing girls, as you would, and it becomes this giant mystery. They call in the FBI to help, and I was one of the agents who got on a plane and flew around the world to go to Saipan in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific to begin knocking on doors, asking questions, and solving the mystery of these girls. We did a landfill search of the landfill in Saipan, where we were out there in the heat and the stink of all the garbage, digging through the garbage to find the bodies of these two girls. Because what drives me crazy about that case is, one, it was unsolved. We never figured out what happened to the girls. We never recovered their bodies. But the thing that really drives me insane is that we knew exactly who did it. We know exactly who the bad guy is, who murdered these two girls, kidnapped and murdered them. But we don't have enough evidence to prosecute him, even to this day. And I have to live with that every day, that the FBI and the police and all the law enforcement and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't get justice for these two missing girls. We couldn't find the bodies. It's really hard to prove a murder without a body in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. How were you guys able to connect that he was likely the individual?
Overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, beyond a reasonable doubt, but certainly not enough to bring someone up on murder charges without a dead body.
Yeah.
And we live in the system where if we can't rise to our burden of proof, that person gets to be a free man. And I get that. I'm not asking that the system be changed, but I'm disappointed that we were unable to make that case.
Mm-hmm. not to this case, but just to generalize, like, do you feel that there's a blessing where you got to work in some of these financial crimes versus, like, I feel like those type of cases, if that's what you're operating in week in and week out, I mean, the psychology behind that has to be relatively dark too. And I don't know if there's some work that they do within the like FBI where it's like you have therapy you might go talk to, whatever.
The crimes against children people have like therapy.
Yeah,
and they go in for psychological testing and stuff like that. And undercover agents, they did some undercover work, have to go in for psychological testing because you kind of lose track of who you are. And so, but no one really cared about how I was doing psychologically in the financial crime space. That's not like a thing. I mean, it's you're basically an accountant with a gun.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is like,
yeah.
Do you look at that sometimes? And there is also a level where you're like, obviously tons of reasons to be satisfied with your line of work.
Yeah, sure.
Do you also look at that and just be like, I'm happy that I never had to?
No, I think there's a place for everyone in the FBI. That's what's nice. Like, I was a financial crimes guy. I had a real passion for it. I had a real knack for it. I made a lot of cases in that area. I don't know that I would have been a good drug agent. One, the war on drugs, I don't really give a shit about it. Two, it requires a lot of proactive investigation where I was much better in reactive investigations where the crime had already happened and I'm going to piece together what happened. A drug agent needs to have an informant or an undercover go in there and make buys and they're intercepting drugs here and there. It's incredibly difficult and job that requires just talents that I don't have. And, there's other agents who are great teachers. They go teach at the academy. There's other agents who are great HR people. They hire FBI agents. And so there's a place for all of us. And I feel very happy that I found my place. Mm-hmm. And while there's certainly crimes way more significant than the pissant little financial crimes that I worked. My point though is that there are more significant crimes than that. At no point do I believe that the financial crime cases I work put me at the tip of the spear of the best of the FBI. But the strength of the FBI is that diversity of things we can do, right? I mean, I have nothing bad to say about the DEA, but if you're not into the war on drugs, I'm not sure what you're going to be doing for a living at the DEA. The nice thing about the FBI is we had hundreds of different statutes that we enforced, and hopefully everybody settles into the one that they can add the most value. And I found mine in financial crimes.
Yeah, no, that's an incredible answer for that. But so let's wrap up on Hawaii here. So we went through that Ponzi scheme. Like, what were some of the other items that you're kind of clearing out there? I know it ended up being the tail end of your career there. So, you know, when did you start saying, you're getting ready to call it wraps, or what was? I was
going broke.
Okay.
FBI agents get paid a fine salary. I mean, I would never complain about that, but I wasn't putting any money away. All my money was going toward my mortgage and getting my kids educated and just living. And so. And I'm getting into my 40s at that point. My savings was way less than my colleagues on the mainland who were saving. And I'd sort of Hawaii had kind of played out for me. I had done all the hikes, I'd done all the beaches. My kids were getting to high school age, which presents a whole different educational challenge. And so I began auditioning cities in the U.S. by taking self-funded housing trips to different cities and looking at the schools, talking to realtors, looking at the real estate, just sort of getting a vibe for the city until I found I liked a handful of cities that I liked. But I landed in Jacksonville, Florida as the city that I wanted to be in. And so through some internal politics at the FBI, I was able to secure a transfer to Jacksonville, Florida, which is where I finished out my career for the last few years.
Why did Jacksonville stand out to you? Was it just
I like Florida for the lack of state income tax.
Yep.
I was after Chicago. I was a Chicago guy, like born and bred, but then I go to Hawaii, and so I was just done with cold weather. The idea of going back to cold weather was too horrible to contemplate.
Oh, God, yeah.
You can get and then pre-COVID, you get a lot of house for your money in Florida back then. And I found a kind of a great community, very resort-like, with lots of outdoor activities, good swim teams for the kids and stuff like that. Excellent high schools and a ton of great colleges where I could afford to send my kids to because in-state tuition. You got Florida State, Central Florida. There's all these great schools there that, as opposed to New Jersey, where you're kind of stuck with Rutgers.
Yep.
And so it just kind of made sense. And I went to Jacksonville and just kind of fell in love with it. It's a great, great city. I don't know that it'd be great. I wouldn't recommend anyone vacation in Jacksonville, but to live in and raise kids in, it's fantastic.
I know there's not obviously, I'm sure you're located, it's a very specific area, but Jacksonville has like a pretty, God, I don't even know where, not Broward, God, what is it? But there's a hot spot there as well with like criminal activity as well. Was there
Right.
a good opportunity with that?
That's something, right? You want, I don't want to be in Mayberry,
That's
right?
what I was
I'm a
gonna
law
say,
enforcement officer.
Yeah.
And so Jacksonville's the largest city in the U.S. People don't think about it, but the land mass that Jacksonville covers is just massive. We got farms. Yeah, there's a history there. I won't bore your viewers with it, but basically they took the entire Duval County and turned in Jacksonville and Duval County became the same political entity. So you got like farmland way out in the sticks, and then you got like a city. And so, like all big cities, there's good neighborhoods and bad neighborhoods. I'm living in a nearby suburb, and so I got all the suburb. I'm living in like the most suburban of suburbs, like Truman Shore suburbs. So I'm not dealing with urban problems. People
just
drive
gators.
Gators and golf carts and stuff like that. And so I like it. But there's plenty of crime in Jacksonville to keep FBI agents busy. It's a very busy office, but in a very senior office for all the reasons I cited. People like to finish out their careers in Jacksonville, and so you get a lot of really senior agents making really big cases there.
Was there anything in the last couple of years that really stood out as kind of like your Jacksonville case that you felt like?
My career in Jacksonville was fine. There were great cases, but there's nothing like I wasn't lighting the world on fire with like big headline cases, right? That was, American Greed wasn't coming out to Jacksonville every year to do one of my cases like they were in Hawaii. There's nothing like the Chicago. I was working cases that were in the history books. Jacksonville, I worked very good cases involving corporate embezzlements and Ponzi schemes for the most part, investment fraud schemes. There's no one case that jumps out at me as a particularly interesting story that any story I tell from Jacksonville would be trumped by the stories I've been telling you for the past, for the while. But good office, good agents. I made good cases there. And then COVID happened.
And so what happened with COVID?
COVID happened, and I got and I caught COVID, and I got benched for a week. And during that week, I got segregated into a room in my house because to not get the rest of the family sick.
As it goes, yep.
And I had time to actually think instead of I've been running for 26 years. I was 51 years old. For 26 years, I've been just going at a dead-on sprint, loving my job every day, working cases. I went 26 years without a promotion at the FBI because all I wanted to do then and now is work cases. And COVID gave me time to think. And I started thinking about the timing of it all. Because mandatory retirement's age 57, and age 50 I was eligible. So I really needed to decide when in that 7-year window of time should I actually tap out. I love the job. It was my identity. It's all I've ever wanted to do. But you got to leave at some point. Do I want to leave when I have some relative youth and vigor?
Some pep in the step.
Some pep in my step to try and maybe do, hang out my own shingle, do investigations for clients? Or do I want to wait till I'm a broken down 57-year-old guy? And I sort of made the calculation of tapping out and retiring and sort of declaring victory at what I thought was the top of my game, as opposed to kind of being one of those old agents before the burnout really sets in. And so I retired.
Rare fair fighter to go out on top, so that's good to hear. Retiring from the FBI. Again, it was definitely the right decision, what you're highlighting, and it was like, but what was the feeling? I get it had to be there had to be a lot of debate happening as well, because you're leaving the job that you still talk so passionately about, what was the mindset for that retirement?
Well, it was tough, my whole identity had been wrapped up on being an FBI agent, right? My family loved the idea. My brother, sister loved the idea of saying their brother's an FBI agent. And so I was also a media spokesperson for the FBI as kind of a side hustle for my time in Chicago and Hawaii. And so the community knew me as an FBI agent. I'd go to Costco and people would say, hey, you're the FBI guy from on TV. And so having that portion of my identity taken from me, I really just kind of needed to reinvent myself and figure out what matters to me and who I am. And the good news is that I was able to kind of parlay that into a career as a private investigator, working for myself, trying to bring the quality of the FBI investigations to the private investigative world, which is what I'm doing now.
So when did that begin? Was that late 2020, 2021? Like,
No, it
what
was
was it?
2021. It was instantly. I had the curse, which I wouldn't recommend anyone do, of, I retired on May 31st. On June 1st, I landed a whale of a client.
Oh boy.
Right. And so I thought
You enjoyed retirement for a
yeah,
little
well, no, I
bit.
mean, I don't mind that. I was happy to hit the
Yeah.
ground running, but I thought, well, this is fantastic. The money's just going to be pouring in. I mean,
Yeah.
and so it doesn't really work that way. You spend a lot of time hustling for clients, and so I worked this big client for the first couple of weeks, a big investigation involving political corruption and embezzlement in Hawaii, of all places. That a former prosecutor recommended me to an attorney who needed someone, a PI, to do investigation and then expert witness testimony.
Are you able to speak to that at all? Or?
Yeah, the case has been litigated, and there was a parallel criminal investigation. It was a guy who ran a defense contractor in Hawaii, who was basically he was the CEO but not the sole owner. There were other owners, and he was embezzling money from the company for himself. And then it was during the window, it was after COVID, right? So he was getting these PPP loans that everybody was getting.
Yeah.
And instead of using it to kind of support the business, he was using it to put down payments on real estate for himself and kind of live large. And then he was also making political donations to members of Congress in order to try to get contracts in like the shipyards and things like that. And but which is not, sadly, illegal. But what he was doing was he was giving money to friends and family to make donations, because there's a limit on how much you or I can donate to a candidate. And so, but there's not a limit to what you and I and my mom and my dad. And so he was giving money to a bunch of other people, including employees, to make donations to this politician, who then miraculously awarded him the contract. And so I put all that together. I testified in a civil case against him from the co-owners of the company who were trying to get him out. And we got a very favorable ruling. And now the FBI is kind of catching up on that and making their case too. He's going to be going to prison soon.
So you've mentioned that a few times. Do PIs, are you guys usually ahead of the curve of the FBI with this, just because of like timing or?
It happened. Oh, yeah. I mean, this case was really running parallel. The FBI was doing their thing while I was doing mine, and mine didn't require a whole lot of legwork. And because it was more of a forensic accounting type of gig. But it depends. The FBI only learns about cases, particularly financial crime cases, when the victim tells them about it. If that victim chooses to not call the FBI but conduct their own internal investigation first, then the internal investigators, the PI or the forensic accountant, because I wear both hats, gets first kick at the can. A lot of the cases that I work now, I do the investigation, and then I convince my client that it might be in their legal best interest for me to package it up and hand carry it to the FBI.
How often? What's the debate usually around that? Are they usually comfortable with it? Do they think like it's going to bring too much?
What often happens in my cases is someone is ripped off in a giant embezzlement scheme or a investment fraud scheme. I conduct the entire investigation. I create an FBI referral report, an actual piece of paper. But instead of taking it to the FBI, I will take it to the bad guy, and I'll put it down in front of them, and I'll say, "My name's Tom Simon. I'm a former FBI special agent currently working as a private investigator. I've been hired by my client who wants me to talk to you. I've conducted this investigation into this fraud that you've conducted. I got to tell you professionally, it looks really bad. It looks bad for you." And I said, and I'm going to hand carry this to my colleagues at the FBI. But my client doesn't even want the government to be involved. My client would really prefer you to handle it like gentlemen. You need to pay my guy back. And I go, I'm not threatening you, because I don't get to decide whether the FBI opens a case or not, right? So I'm not sicking the FBI on you necessarily, but I've been doing this long enough that I know that this looks bad for you. And so it's not a situation where I'm extorting you saying, pay my guy or the FBI is going to get you, because I can't control whether the FBI is going to get you or not. But my client can choose to notify the FBI or have me do it on his behalf, or he can choose not to. So if you pay him back, I think, or work out a payment plan with him, he might be inclined to not have me hand carry this to my colleagues.
How much research are you doing on these individuals ahead of it when you're going to confront them there too? Because obviously, you got some whack jobs out there.
Yeah.
You don't want to come up and say.
My resources are way limited now, right? When I was with the FBI, I had these great databases available to me and these fantastic professional analysts and who could tell me what color underpants someone's wearing on any given day, right? Now I got to pay for databases. I pay a fortune for databases, which act as the engine for my firm. to kind of give me information about these people's criminal history, their financial history. Have they ever declared bankruptcy? What are their assets? What houses do they own? What cars do they own? So I pay for that data, which gives me the information I need to kind of utilize to kind of drive my investigations.
What are some of these databases? Because I mean, for the layperson, like we haven't really ever heard of this.
Right.
Like, what are
the big one that I subscribe to? I hate giving them a plug because I asked them to sponsor me and they ghosted me. But TransUnion, the credit reporting service, has an investigative arm called TLO. I don't know what it stands for. But it's a lot of great information for private investigators. You got to be a licensed private investigator and have a site visit where they kind of check out your office and make sure it's secure, because there's a lot of information available. I think there's 3 or 4 other really big competitors.
Is that kind of the same for all of them though, where you have to have the license?
Yeah, there's no way that you would
just get it.
Yeah, you wouldn't get to subscribe to it just because you're like, you want to like screen dates on Tinder
or
something.
That's what I was going to say. You can look up future podcast guys, a little bit more information. But all right, interesting. So you get off that first case and then
I'm like, all right, where's the next $40,000 case? And it was just crickets. And so I had to start selling my ass. I had to get out there and build a website, take out a Google ad, spending a fortune on marketing, trying to bring clients in the door. And clients would come in the door every now and then. The idea of hiring a former FBI agent to kind of settle your dispute with somebody, but it was like domestic surveillances where I'm following around the cheating husband, like peeing in a Gatorade bottle for 8 hours, waiting for him to do something, and just miserable work. And where all I really wanted to do was the big financial crime work. And so time marched on, and I started thinking, you know what, this just isn't working for me. I'm getting clients, but the clients, aren't what I want to do for a living. I mean, I'm not saying the clients suck because somebody has an issue, a domestic issue. It's a serious issue to them. And I took it seriously and I gave them the professionalism they deserved. But it was also a situation where I really wanted to investigate financial crimes for clients like I did when I was 23 years old at KPMG. Mm-hmm. And so I had this brainstorm, the idea of, well, listen, I don't have, a lot of like marketing know-how, but what I do have is 30 years of stories of having done this for a living. Why don't I launch social media accounts on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, what else is there? YouTube. And I'll just do every day a 1 to 2 minute video telling the story of a case. And so I start doing that, telling the stories of cases or giving a financial crimes tip or an investigative tip or talking about some other interesting case that was in the news. A quick hit. Not the long form great stuff that you do, but just like, but more than dancing with my shirt off like a normal TikTok video, right? And so did these 90-second videos, and they started to take off. LinkedIn I started getting leads and cases and following people on LinkedIn started wanting to follow me. TikTok, immediately like shot up to 70,000 followers. Instagram hit 17,000. And then the next thing you know, now I'm about 250,000 as of the day of this recording across platforms. And people are contacting me to come work their cases for them. Big embezzlement case in Detroit. I hop on a plane, go to Detroit and work that case for that client. And so it's social media has like catapulted my PI agency into what I would argue is one of the most prominent financial crime PI agencies in America.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it had to be a pretty cool feeling too, doing that, like seeing social media start to take off, right?
In a different way though, right? Because again, you're using it as your career. I'm using it as an advertising vehicle, but that advertising vehicle is not hey, want to buy an investigation? Because selling investigations is hard. People don't need a private investigator until they need a private investigator. And so all you can really do is give people a sense of comfort that you know what you're doing in this area. So if a problem should arise, you're the guy they call and not the guy from the yellow pages. Yeah. And so far it's been very successful, and it's led to other opportunities as far as television and stuff like that, and gotten me on great shows like yours.
I appreciate that. No, trust me, the shows couldn't be great if it wasn't for guests like you. So that's the most important part. But with that, do you think there's an interesting dynamic here? Because when we talk about PIs, you bring up, for most people, I would imagine when they think of PI, they kind of immediately go to the cheating spouse, that thing, or like,
I'm not saying that's dishonorable work.
I'm not at all. It's simpler work, and like your background, you've dealt with these massive cases and everything. So I'm saying is, do you think part of this was also breaking down that, connotation people have for a PI with, like, if there's a massive financial crime, they might not think to go get a PI right away, but it's like now you're kind of breaking a barrier where it's like, oh shit, I could hire a guy for this, get something done.
Yeah. I'm hoping that people do consider that if they're ripped off, the idea of instead of just writing off the loss or calling 911 and having like the local patrolman just be baffled by it, to allow me to help shepherd their case into the right hands. Some of my investigations are really just me gathering together all the information and putting it together in a coherent report for me to take to my former colleagues at the FBI and say, hey, I got a client who got really ripped off badly. They just want to see that justice is done correctly. Now, any citizen can call the FBI or go to the office there and make that report, but people are bad storytellers, and people are poorly organized in their thoughts and in their evidence. And so having someone like me to act as an intermediary between this victim who's shattered and the FBI adds value to my clients. That's my whole game now, is adding value to my clients.
Do you feel like there's a bit of separation as well? We talked about this on the ride over, the name brand that you can develop around it. And then also, like, is there a way you can ping pong the idea similar to what, the reputation was at the FBI? Like, this guy's the closer. That's the guy that can finish it up.
I mean, you don't want to overpromise though, right?
True.
And because most of these victims, what they really want is their money back. So what I can't do is tell a client, I'm going to get your money back 100%, right? Because I'm not a collection agency and I'm not like a strong arm Sopranos type guy. There's other guys you could hire for that. And I also can't guarantee that the FBI is going to open a case or that that case is going to be successfully prosecuted. What I can do is say that we're going to put our best foot forward in making that case to the FBI or to the bad guy to pay you back. And so there's a lot of hedging in what I do. I think I'm very good at what I do, and my clients are usually thrilled with what happens. And the FBI loves it because they like getting case referrals from me that are put together in such a way that it's very little effort for the agent who's assigned that case, because I've done a lot of the heavy lifting for them.
So what do you think makes, you did 26 years in the FBI, working similar services, but there's a vast amount of differences. What do you think is the thing that excites you the most about this new career path, about being a PI, about being, your own boss, your own opportunity here?
That's a good question. You need to recalibrate right away that you're not going to be working the big cases, right? Mm-hmm. The cases that I'm getting assigned as a PI are not the ones that are these monumental kind of earth-shaking things like I got to do in the FBI. So you need to recalibrate for that. And I think the best thing that you can do is just help your clients understand that this person is vulnerable. They're going to be paying you for your efforts, and I'm not cheap. And then and you got to just turn everything into client focus. What can I do to give this client the best likelihood of a successful outcome? What can I do to like be there for the client when they call me at like 9 o'clock on a Sunday night because they're worried about this or that, or all that. And so my clients genuinely like me because I'm always happy to lend that understanding ear to them in addition to doing the kind of legwork. But I never ever want to overpromise them results, because there's no such thing as sure thing results in the world of financial crime investigations.
Yeah, no, I mean that. Yeah, but I think it is really interesting too, where it's, you go from, you're in FBI, it's kind of this conglomerate. Now you kind of get to really get your teeth really into these operations. It's kind of you. It's there's entrepreneurial attitudes, maybe not like the right word for it, but there is that feeling of just like you're in control of this
right.
situation.
I mean, the other trick is to not get bogged down in the little stuff, contract out what you can't. Like, I still get calls for people who want like surveillances done. And I've stopped doing surveillances myself because, one, I suck at them. And two, they're just...
Why do you suck at them?
Because when you're with the FBI, you got like a dozen cars following a guy. When you're your own PI, you're just bumper locking the guy and hoping he doesn't look in his rearview mirror for 8 hours.
Yeah.
And so... But I got a guy who's a private investigator who used to be a CIA guy, and he loves surveillances, and he's good at it. He's better than I will ever be at it. And but maybe he's not the best businessman. Maybe he's not out there like on Instagram selling his ass like I am. And so I can bring in the client and then pay him to do the surveillance. It's a contractor, and everybody wins because they're going to get a better product from him, and I'll take care of kind of project managing it. I got a recent embezzlement case from a Windows company in Chicago. It had like 1,000 different instances of embezzlement because it involved the use of the company credit card. And it would have been so expensive for the client if I sat there and did all the data entry. But I got a young woman who's a accountant in Chicago that I knew back in the day who likes the idea of being involved in fraud cases. And so I'm able to kind of give that to her to handle the data entry on the embezzlement, give it to me, I spot check, and I turn it and I massage the numbers and turn it into an actual report. The client wins because I'm able to save them a fortune because they're not paying my high hourly rate. They're paying her much lower hourly rate for doing the data entry.
So let's highlight this for any potential clients maybe watching as well.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what makes a good report to the FBI? Like why is it different when you're doing it, other than, of course, you have the connection there, but like what makes a report different?
Or being organized. People come in and victims don't know where to start the story. The story begins with the lies they were told that separated them from their money in the first place. Victims tend to not understand that. Victims want to start when the financial returns from the Ponzi scheme stop.
Yeah.
Right. And then I started calling him saying, where's my money? Where's my money? And he didn't, and it's just a bad way to do it. The other thing to understand is that the agent taking the complaint at the FBI may not be a financial crimes agent. And so you may be talking past them and they may just not understand what you're saying because you're not a good storyteller. You're not you haven't taken the documents and organized them. You're showing up at the FBI office with like a shoebox full of Western Union receipts. A lot of my victims are victims of romance scams. And so they've...
What is romance scam?
They meet the man of their dreams online and begin sending him money, but it turns out he's not he doesn't look like Brad
Nigerian
Pitt.
Prince,
It turns out he's a Nigerian prince or a Chinese prince in fairness. or a Ukrainian princess is a recent one I had. And so my point though is that that any victim can, and I tell my victims this, my clients this, that listen, you can save yourself some money and just take this to the FBI. But my recommendation is that you get really organized, or you can hire me to organize it. And that's not too expensive if they already have the materials.
And plus, most people don't want to do the organizing.
Yeah.
It's just what people
they're
are.
just not good at it. And it opens up old wounds to them. And they're too close to the situation. And they put in 100 things that just don't matter in their narrative of what happened.
So have you had to work with any crypto type of scams yet?
On the private eye side, I didn't do I did it.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. I worked some crypto scams there. It's not my, following the money through the blockchain and all that isn't where my strength lies. But I've had victims who, have fallen for that wrong number scam. Victim has WhatsApp and they get like a wrong number text, and the little circle of the woman is a super hot Asian woman, and I'm not Phil, I'm Harry, and then next thing you know, she's talking about this great crypto program that he can get into, and hundreds of thousands of dollars later, the guy can't get his money out of, even though he's making money on the screen in crypto. And so I'm seeing that again and again and again. And I've kind of helped some of those guys out and understanding that this is a fraud, running down the phone numbers and the addresses and the email addresses they have in my databases, and in reality, showing them that this is a fraud, and then shepherding the case to the FBI for them.
So you're a massive fan of crypto.
I hate crypto. I think the whole thing's garbage. There's no good cryptocurrency.
Why do you think that?
2 reasons. One, it's not a currency, and it never will be a currency. Even Bitcoin, the best one, or Ethereum, no one's using that as a currency. So all these libertarian arguments about how we're going to get rid of the Federal Reserve and blah, 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 printing money, all fall on deaf ears because they're all full of shit, because it's not a currency. It never will be a currency. You can't buy anything with Bitcoin, right? You turn it into real money to buy something with it, right? So let's set that nonsense aside, which is every crypto bros argument. Then what we're really talking about here is an unregistered security, right? It's an unregistered security that people are buying, speculative unregistered security that they're buying at a profit. The difference between this security and your stock or your bond or anything else is that it's not tethered to anything in reality, right? There's no such thing as cryptocurrency as a security. It has nothing to do with, everyone's like, oh, you're investing in the blockchain. You're not investing in the blockchain. This is a product of the blockchain. I have no problem with the blockchain as a data processing device. I have a problem with these fake securities that they're creating that aren't tied to anything in reality. It's not, a stock represents a proportional ownership of a company. A bond represents a debt. We could talk about warrants and options and everything, but they're tethered to something in reality. Cryptocurrency is not. When you own cryptocurrency, you own nothing. You own nothing. And so the idea that somehow this is going to make you rich, and the reason people are making money in cryptocurrency is because it has all the benefits of a pump and dump scheme and a Ponzi scheme, where the only thing propping this thing up is new investors coming in to pump money into it, and that house of cards is going to fall. Problem is, It's not going to fall for a long, long time because the SEC just allowed them to do exchange traded funds of cryptocurrency. And we can get into what that is if you want, but it's going to pump a lot of liquidity into Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and keep it propped up longer than it would otherwise. But the end is coming.
Does that worry you?
It worries me because I was just so disappointed that the Securities and Exchange Commission approved the idea of them selling stocks where there's nothing in that stock except for holdings in Bitcoin and other garbage cryptocurrency. I don't know what pressure they were getting politically, what lobbying took place to make that happen. But yeah, it just disappoints me because it was such a stupid move for the Securities and Exchange Commission to do that. And a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money.
And that's what, yeah, I guess that's why I'm saying, like, does it worry? Like, do you think that there's going to be a massive shock too? Because I mean, so many people my generation are like, I'm putting all my money in crypto, and I'm like, that's not smart.
Good. Well, you're going to end up eating wet newspaper because you didn't listen to me. I'll be Chicken Little saying that the sky is falling.
Yeah. So okay, how is the FBI? And obviously, you were kind of leaving right at the tail end of this, but like, how does the FBI operating with all this too? People, again, we go back to these like crazy conspiracy theorists that'll be like, they want to take down crypto because it's freedom, but like what you're highlighting here, it's the schemes of all schemes. We saw this with FTX. We saw Sam Bankman-Fried. Like it's the schemes of all schemes. So what is currently going on in these agencies to kind of?
Well, we're getting a lot of agents. We're getting a lot of smart young people instead of old washed up people like me in the door who understand cryptocurrency, understand the blockchain, understand how that all works, and have the ability to kind of do the analysis needed to kind of follow the money, because that's the whole ball game, right? But at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is the only frauds are when people are being lied to. If you're being lied to separate you from your money, and you tell me you're going to be investing my money in crypto, and then you do something other with it, then that's a crime. If you're telling me that you're going to be investing my money in DogeCoin and I invest in it and I lose a bunch of money, that's not a crime. The FBI is not the bad investment police. It's the fraud police.
What's your view then on FTX and what happened with SBF and all that? And
yeah, I mean, it was a amazingly sophisticated crime, but I don't have all the details on it. I'm not super up on the case, but I'm proud to see that the case was largely made and the bad guys will be going to prison, which gives me faith that the FBI knows what they're doing in this area and they have people way smarter than me working these cases.
And see, but that's a debate that people make.
What don't you like about it? Are you unhappy with the way that turned out?
No. It's nothing with that. It's just that there's conversations around, how are they actually going to bring this day in court? What's the punishment going to look like? Because it's a new market. There's debate around, because what you're highlighting here is like crypto isn't a promised asset. And it's like, does it fall under what normal, clearances that are there for securities? What's the rules?
Right. And again, charging securities fraud laws are all very technical, right? But again, most of these cases are just being charged under the wire fraud or mail fraud statute, mostly wire fraud these days. And so all you really need to do is show that somebody lost money. Fraud is what? Fraud is theft by deception. Was this money stolen and were you lied to separate you from their money? So I don't think it changes from the frauds I was working in 1999 versus the frauds we're working today. Just the underlying lies are more complicated and sophisticated.
Does it worry? Do you think the FBI is worried about the fact that, since these are, I mean, I guess this has kind of always been the same, but like there's a tangible possibility that you could have other countries operating within these. Without question,
yeah. Crime has become very multinational now, and Bitcoin is making that way more difficult, because in the old days when it was following a wire transfer from a U.S. bank to a Russian, Chinese, or Nigerian bank, that was something you could put your teeth into, you could follow. Once this thing goes into someone's Bitcoin wallet, your visibility into it's very clouded, and I'm seeing that in the cases that I'm working now.
Well, I guess wrapping up here, if there was one lesson that you can take away from all your time at the FBI, and that's not an easy question, I know, what would be that lesson?
What lesson? You mean for the average citizen? To help me out, be a little more specific.
Let's go with both, because what was the lesson for Tom Simon, and what would be the lesson that you would give to the average person?
All right, my lesson is that I thought the world would be a lot more like the Marvel comics, where the bad guys were all very, very bad and the good guys were all very, very good and the victims were all very, very sympathetic. I found that most of the bad guys I investigated were not bad through and through. They were, most, especially in the financial crimes area. Maybe they were scout leaders. Maybe they loved their kids. Maybe they never cheated on their wives. And they just made one or two really bad ethical choices, in my case, to steal money from people. Again, let's leave the hardcore con men out because there's actually very few of those. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that bad guys would be terrible people, but bad guys are normal people who make terrible choices. I think that was my big takeaway.
And then what would you say would be applicable to the average Joe, to the person that's watching this now?
The average Joe in the fraud area, I think the people want to watch out for let's start with the fraud, the investment fraud. High rates of return, low risk, don't exist. If it seems like a get-rich-quick scheme and you think your ship has come in, it probably hasn't. For businesses and embezzlements, we didn't really get into this too much, but I worked a lot of corporate embezzlements. I work a lot of them today. The entire ballgame there is segregation of duties. You need to make sure that the employee who has access to the assets of your company and has the checkbook or access to send wire transfers is a different employee than the individual who has access to the accounting records of your company. Segregating those two duties makes it so no one can steal money and then cover it up in the accounting records like Johnny the mafioso did at the beginning when we started this story.
Well, that's the perfect way to bring it all back together, Tom. This was a really fun one.
Oh, man. Thanks so much for having me on. This has been a blast.
Yeah, no, this was awesome. We're going to do another one here again soon because, we could jump into all that embezzlement again, too. And, yeah, man, this was a blast. Thank you for coming on. And
thank you for having me.
We'll get another one soon. I hope you guys did enjoy that. It was an insane conversation with Tom. If you haven't checked out part 1, make sure to check it out. Should be linked right here. We go over everything from how to join the FBI, what FBI recruitment looks like, and some of his first cases, which involved busting the Chicago Mafia and just a ton of stuff. So make sure to check that out. But if you guys did enjoy, remember, leave this video a like and subscribe so you can catch up on the future content. We have some crazy interviews coming out, one next week with someone that got from jail to Navy SEALs. So there's just a ton coming out. So with that, I hope to see you guys in the next one.